Hey everyone, welcome back to Paranormal M. Tonight I have another set of strange paranormal stories for you. Before we start, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next video. Our first story comes from Pamela Anderson, and it's about something many people would probably find scary at first. But instead of reacting with fear, she decided to stay calm, ask questions, and see what was really going on. It's an interesting one, especially if you've ever felt like something unseen was trying to get your attention. Now, get comfortable, relax, and I hope you sleep well tonight. Last month, I had this moment that really shifted something in me. I started wondering if poltergeists, or at least some of the experiences we call poltergeist activity, might not be what we've always assumed they are. Most of us have been taught to think of them as dark, hostile, evil, or even demonic. That idea gets planted early, and once fear takes the wheel, it can change the whole experience. But I started thinking, what if we approached the unknown differently? What if, instead of reacting with panic, we paused and met it with curiosity? Not blind belief, not reckless trust, just calm curiosity. Because fear has a way of turning everything sharp. It closes us down. It makes every sound feel threatening, every movement feel dangerous, every strange moment feel like an attack. But curiosity leaves the door open just enough to ask, "Who's there? What are you trying to say?" And that made me wonder something else. How do we actually find out who or what is trying to get our attention? I believe we're born with a natural ability to sense and communicate beyond words, but most of us are taught to shut that down. Some people stay connected to it naturally. Others need a bridge. For me, copper dowsing rods have become that bridge. So the next time you hear a sound that doesn't belong, or see something move when nothing should be moving, or notice something strange happening around you, give yourself a moment first. Let your heart settle. Let your breathing slow down. Don't rush straight into fear. Then, if you have rods, ask questions. Ask who is there. Ask what they want. Ask whether the energy is loving, neutral, or something you should step away from. I'm not saying this explains every poltergeist experience. I'm not saying every strange event is harmless. But I do think it might be worth asking questions before assuming the worst. Because when you think about it, if something is trying to get your attention and you keep ignoring it, maybe it would get louder. Maybe it would knock harder. Maybe it would move something bigger. That doesn't automatically mean it's evil. It might just mean it's trying to be noticed. And honestly, it wouldn't hurt us to try to understand more before we judge. Our perception is so limited. We only perceive a tiny fraction of what exists around us. There could be realities, beings, dimensions, and energies sharing space with us all the time, and we simply don't have the senses to notice them. And sometimes it isn't just our physical perception that limits us. Sometimes it's our emotional frequency. The way I understand it, emotions are energy, and energy carries frequency. Some beings may exist at much higher frequencies than we usually operate from. Others may be lower. And when someone is living in a low emotional state for a long time, feeling hopeless, unloved, angry, afraid, or deeply alone, that energy may attract more of the same. That makes me think about kids and teenagers who are bullied. When someone is pushed into sadness, shame, fear, or loneliness over and over, it can feel like a dark cloud follows them everywhere. Maybe there's more happening around people in pain than we realize. And maybe, if we had more understanding and the right tools, we could help people in ways we haven't even considered yet. Then I finally had a chance to test this idea. About half an hour before I wrote this down, I saw a white mist appear to my left. Then it happened again. So I grabbed my dowsing rods and started asking questions. I said, "Hello, my loving guide." The rods answered yes. I asked, "Were you trying to get my attention?" The answer was a small yes. Then I got this impression, almost like a thought that wasn't fully mine. "We're always trying to get your attention." And there was this light, playful feeling with it, almost like laughter. So I asked, "Did you just say that?" The rods answered yes. Then I asked, "Did I just see a white mist to my left twice?" "Yes." "Was it you?" "No." "Was it our cosmic cousins?" The rods gave a big yes. So I said, "Hello, my cosmic cousins." The rods answered yes. I asked, "Is there something you need to tell me?" "Yes." And then I got stuck, because I didn't know what to ask next. I'm still working on my intuition. Sometimes I receive impressions clearly, and sometimes it feels like trying to hear a whisper through a wall. My roommate Marcus is much better with that kind of thing, so I called him over and asked if anything was coming through for him. Before I could even finish the question, he answered. He said, "They're saying you're doing a great job." So I asked the rods, "Is that what you're telling me?" "Yes." Then I asked, "Are my posts helping people?" "Yes." After that, I got another impression. They wanted me to keep doing what I was doing. So I asked, "Did you just say that to me?" "Yes." Then I asked, "Is there anything else?" "No." So I said, "Thank you. I love you guys." And the rods crossed in acknowledgement. Whether someone believes my experience or not, it taught me something important. Fear closes doors. Curiosity opens them. For generations, we've been taught to fear the unknown. But fear can stop us from learning, understanding, and exploring possibilities that might exist beyond what we currently know. The moment I stopped reacting with fear and started asking questions, everything changed. Instead of assuming something negative was happening, I became curious. I wanted to understand what was taking place and why. That shift transformed the whole experience. Maybe every unusual experience isn't a threat. Maybe some of them are attempts at communication. Maybe some are invitations to learn something new about ourselves, consciousness, and the nature of reality. We don't have to believe everything blindly, but we also don't have to dismiss everything automatically. We can investigate. We can ask questions. We can stay open while still using discernment. At the very least, approaching the unknown with curiosity instead of fear gives us a chance to understand more than we did before. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that reality may be much stranger, more connected, and more alive than we were taught. And to me, that is absolutely worth exploring. About a month ago, I got married in Samoa, and we stayed at Samoa Beach Resort in Mulifanua. It was beautiful, honestly. The wedding itself felt full of love, family, music, and that kind of happiness you wish you could bottle up and keep somewhere safe. But what happened the night after the wedding has stayed with me ever since. That evening, a big group of my family went into town to keep celebrating at a club. I wasn't in the van with them on the way back to the resort, but later on, one of my relatives told me what happened. Her husband, Sione, has always said he has the gift of sight. He says he's been able to see spirits since he was young, and in our family, people don't really laugh that kind of thing off. It's something we take seriously. On the drive back, someone in the van suddenly needed to use the bathroom. It was late, and my mom was driving. She was about to pull over somewhere quiet when Sione suddenly told her, very firmly, not to stop. He told her to keep driving. Later, he explained that he could see people standing outside along the road, watching the van. But according to him, they weren't living people. They were spirits. The part that made everyone go quiet afterward was that they realized they had almost stopped right near a burial site. Eventually, they found a closed service station, and the person got out to use the bathroom there. When they got back into the van, Sione apparently looked toward the back and said, "You're not welcome to come with us." The next day, he said he believed 3 spirits had gotten into the van anyway and followed them back to the resort. He also said that once they arrived, he could feel even more spirits gathering around. He believed they were drawn to him because he could see them, and he said it became too much for him as the night went on. I didn't hear any of this until later. That same night, after sitting outside with family for a while, I went back to my room by myself. Everyone else stayed outside drinking, laughing, and celebrating. But the moment I walked into the room, something felt wrong. I can't explain it in a neat little way. It wasn't just fear. It was this heavy feeling, like the air had changed, like I wasn't alone. When I was younger, I used to sense things sometimes. I would feel presences around me or know something was there without seeing it clearly. As I got older, I prayed for that ability to leave me because I didn't want it. And over time, those experiences became very rare. So when that feeling came back in the room, it shook me. I put my AirPods in and tried to fall asleep, but I couldn't relax. I kept feeling like someone was walking around the room, watching me. While I was lying there scrolling on my phone, I kept getting this image in my mind of an older Samoan woman. She was short, with gray hair tied back in a bun. She was wearing a pulatasi, and she had a strong, solid build. I couldn't see her like a person standing in front of me, but the image kept pressing into my mind so clearly. The feeling got stronger and stronger until I started calling family members in other rooms because I really didn't want to be alone. Most people were asleep by then, so I kept calling my husband, who was still outside with everyone. My grandmother came in and out of the room a few times too, which helped a little. Then something happened that honestly unsettled me more than anything else. The room phone rang. I could barely hear it because my AirPods were in, so I ignored it at first. But my grandmother answered. She said, "Hello? Hello?" And then she realized it was my sister. My grandmother asked her why she had called our room. My sister sounded confused and said, "I didn't call you. Our room phone just started ringing, so I picked it up." Neither side had called the other. That was the moment I felt like whatever I had been sensing all night wasn't just in my head. I spent most of the rest of the night praying until I eventually fell asleep. The next day, I told my husband what had happened, and I also spoke to Sione, the relative who says he can see spirits. He told me he had left the family gathering early because it had become overwhelming. He said there were around 20 spirits standing near us outside while everyone was celebrating. Then I started describing the older Samoan woman I had seen in my mind. Before I could even finish, he cut in and said, "Yes, that's her." He told me he believed she had probably been looking for him. I still think about that night. I don't know exactly what to make of it, but I know what I felt, and I know how real it seemed in that room. So I'm curious, has anyone else experienced anything like this in Samoa or anywhere else? Especially people from cultures where seeing or sensing spirits is something people genuinely believe in and respect. I figured I'd tell you about the first place I ever lived that felt genuinely haunted. This was years before anything strange happened to me in my apartment, and honestly, this house was where I first learned that some buildings seem to remember people. It was back in 2014, during my junior year of college. Me and 4 friends moved into this very old house right across from campus. Everybody knew it as Old Honor. It was one of those houses that had a reputation before you ever stepped through the front door. People partied there, crashed there between classes, wandered in and out all day. It was basically a campus landmark with peeling paint and too many stories attached to it. The house was sort of passed down every year to a new group of guys from the fraternity I was in at the time. That had apparently been going on for decades, so naturally, there were always rumors about it being haunted. I had heard a few, but I didn't take them seriously. College houses collect rumors the way old rugs collect dust. But the house itself really was beautiful underneath all the neglect. It was a Victorian from the late 1800s, with arched doorways, old hand-painted details near the ceilings, and this kind of grand, tired elegance. You could tell someone had loved it once, even if the landlord clearly hadn't loved it in a long time. The weird stuff started almost right away, but at first it was easy to laugh off. Ceiling fans would turn on by themselves. Lights would click off when nobody was near the switch. Faucets in empty bathrooms would suddenly start running. It was creepy, sure, but not enough to scare us out of sleeping there. We treated it like the house had quirks. Then one afternoon, a friend of ours named Lacey was napping on the living room couch between classes. A few of us were outside on the deck when she came running out, completely shaken. She said she had woken up and seen an older man standing in the room, wearing a black suit that looked really old-fashioned, with a tall hat. At first, she thought one of us was messing around in a costume. But then he walked down this short hallway toward the next room, and nobody came out the other side. She got up to check, and there was no one there. We told ourselves she had probably been half asleep, maybe dreaming with her eyes open, something like that. And for the rest of the day, we acted like that explanation was good enough. A couple weeks later, we were having people over before a football game, and a few older guys came up to the house. They told us they had lived in Old Honor back in the 80s. Later on, I asked them if they had ever experienced anything strange there. They didn't even pause. They said yes. Then they told us what they knew about the house. According to them, it had been built by one of the town's early judges for his family, his wife and their 3 children. Not long after they moved in, the judge and all 3 kids died within a short period of time. The wife was supposedly so devastated that she ended her life inside the house. The former tenants said they had seen her now and then, but they told us she never seemed harmful. They actually believed she liked the house being full of people. Like the noise and laughter made it feel alive again. We thought it was a fascinating story, but even then, I don't think we fully believed it. After that, though, things changed. One of my roommates woke up around 2 or 3 in the morning and saw a woman in a white dress in the corner of his room. What bothered him most was the way she appeared. He said she wasn't standing exactly, and she wasn't floating either. She was suspended there, gently moving back and forth. He could see her feet, and they were hanging at about the height they would be if someone were dangling from the ceiling. He stared at her for a minute before reaching for his lamp. When the light came on, she was gone. Then there were the nights I woke up to singing. It happened maybe 3 or 4 times. I'd wake up in the dark and hear a woman's voice, very soft, singing somewhere inside my room. I could never make out the words. It would last maybe 30 seconds, sometimes a little longer, and then it would stop. One night, I was watching my brother's dog. I woke up for no clear reason and saw the dog standing stiff, growling at the exact corner where I had heard the singing before. That one stayed with me. We also had these old hook and eye locks on the bedroom doors, the kind you could only latch from inside the room. Twice, one of my roommate's doors ended up locked with nobody inside. There was no way to open it from the hallway. We had to climb onto the balcony, pull out the window AC unit, crawl through the window, and unlock it from inside. There was just no normal way for that lock to latch itself. But the moment that really scared me happened one evening after work. I was taking a shower. The bathroom was small. The shower was beside the toilet, and between the toilet and the sink there was a little trash can. On the back of the toilet, I had a small radio that I used to play the student station while I showered. I was halfway through washing up when suddenly there was this enormous bang. It was so loud I honestly thought someone had kicked the bathroom door in. At the same time, the radio volume blasted up so high it felt like the whole room had exploded into sound. I ripped open the shower curtain. The trash can was no longer beside the sink. It was sitting in the middle of the bathroom floor. And the radio was balanced perfectly on top of it, facing directly toward the shower. I didn't think. I didn't investigate. I ran straight out of that bathroom, soaking wet and completely naked, bolted into my bedroom, and slammed the door behind me. Later, I tried to make sense of it. I really did. But nothing explained it. The trash can had moved several feet. The radio had somehow left the back of the toilet and landed upright on top of the trash can. And both of them had turned so they were facing the shower, almost like someone had deliberately arranged them that way. After that, the activity kept going until we eventually moved into another house. But nothing ever scared me quite like that again. Old Honor isn't there anymore. It was torn down years later. And I know this may sound strange, but I hope whatever was in that house found peace. For all the fear it gave us, there was something deeply sad about it too. Like the place had been holding its breath for over a century, waiting for someone to finally listen. I was about 16 when this started happening, and back then, I slept by myself in my own room. I didn't have a phone at the time, so once I was in bed, I was just there. Alone. My mom's room was on the other side of the house, far enough that it felt like a whole different world at night. Every night, when it was time to sleep, I'd lie down, say my prayers, and try to calm my mind. But right when I was about to drift off, that's when it would happen. I need you to understand, I wasn't dreaming. I wasn't fully asleep. I would suddenly feel this presence close to me, almost hovering. My body would start tingling all over, my ears would feel blocked, and there was this sharp ringing sound, like a high-pitched noise pressing into my head. Then it felt like something was on top of me. Not just near me, on me. I couldn't breathe properly. It felt like I was being held down, like something was trying to suffocate me. And this didn't happen once. It happened night after night. I got so scared that I started leaving the bathroom light on and forcing myself to stay awake until morning. Eventually, my mom noticed and got upset because she thought I was just refusing to sleep. I didn't know how to explain it without sounding ridiculous. I ended up telling my aunt about it. She told me that the next time I felt it happening, I should say in my mind, "Please leave. You're not welcome here. I don't allow you near me." So I tried. And honestly, it got worse. The numb feeling spread harder through my body. The pressure got heavier. The suffocating feeling became more intense, and I could actually feel pain. It was terrifying. I remember lying there, trying not to panic, but feeling like whatever it was had noticed me noticing it. After that, I told my mom everything. From then on, I started sleeping in her room. And strangely enough, nothing happened there. Nothing happened when I slept on the living room couch either. It only happened in my bedroom. When I stayed at other people's houses, or at my dad's place, or anywhere outside our house, I never felt it. Not once. Eventually, my mom went into my room and prayed there with the Bible. After that, it stopped completely. I never felt that presence again. At least, not in that same way. But recently, about 4 years later, something else happened. In my room, there's a glass window above my bed. I always keep a thick curtain over it, but when the kitchen light is on, even just a little, it reflects around the edges of the curtain. It creates this faint strip of light on the wall. That night, I was lying in bed, and I could see that tiny beam of light coming in through the side of the curtain. I fell asleep for a while, then woke up thirsty. I grabbed my water bottle, took a drink, and as I looked toward the wall, I saw something pass through that beam of light. It looked exactly like a silhouette walking past my window from outside. I froze. At first, I tried to calm myself down. I thought maybe it was my mom getting up to drink water or moving around the house. But then the silhouette came back. This time, it moved closer to the window, almost like it was trying to peek through the little gap in the curtain where the light was slipping in. That's when I completely panicked. It didn't look like my mom. The shape had no hair. It looked like just a bald head close to the glass, trying to look inside. If it had been my mom, I would have seen her hair, because she usually ties it up at night. The next day, I asked her about it. She told me it wasn't her. Those are only two of the things that have happened to me. There are more, but I've already said a lot for now. I still don't know what to think about it. I don't know why it keeps happening, why it only happened in that room before, or how to make sure it doesn't come back. All I know is that it felt real, and it scared me more than I can explain. I want to start by saying this clearly. I love Jesus, and this story is part of the reason I eventually turned my whole heart toward Christ. A few years ago, I got involved with a woman who said she was a medium. I still don't really know who she was. She called herself Angelina, but I never saw a clear picture of her face. Every photo she sent was cropped, blurry, or somehow covered. Whenever she called, it always came through as no caller ID. And even then, she never actually spoke. She would just stay silent on the line and text the whole time. The way she reached out to me was strange from the beginning. She emailed me out of nowhere, and at the time, my email wasn't posted publicly anywhere. I was talking to a guy back then, and she started telling me very specific things about him and his life. Things I had no way of explaining. Things that later turned out to be true. At first, I honestly thought one of my friends was playing some kind of prank on me. Then not long after that, she started saying someone close to us was in danger. She kept warning that something serious was going to happen, and she said she would help us when the time came. Soon after, one of my closest friends, Amani, died by suicide. That part still stays with me. On the night it happened, before any of us knew what had taken place, she kept messaging over and over saying something was wrong with him. She said she had a terrible feeling and that something wasn't right. Later, we found out he had already passed around that same time. After that, everything became even harder to understand. At first, I still thought maybe it was a prank or some kind of manipulation, so I brought friends into it. Other people close to me witnessed things too. We tried to catch inconsistencies. We tried to prove it was fake. We searched for any normal explanation. But instead of things becoming clearer, they only became more confusing. She seemed to know things she should not have known. There were times I would think a question without saying it out loud, and she would respond to it almost immediately. There were times I would say something out loud while I was completely alone, and then I would get a message answering what I had just said. My friends had moments like that too. Sometimes we would be talking about where someone was or why they weren't answering, and before we even reached out, she would message with an explanation. I remember one time we were wondering why a friend wasn't replying, and she texted that the person was in the shower. There were other details she shared that I still can't explain. My mother passed away years ago, and this woman mentioned specific things from my childhood that I had never posted or told her. One thing that really unsettled me was when she said my mother had painted my room purple when I was little. Maybe someone could guess that, but my mother had even painted the concrete floor purple, and she knew that part too. That was such a strange, tiny detail. It didn't feel guessable. What made it even more confusing was that she rarely spoke as herself. A lot of the time, She claimed my friend Amani was communicating through her. And sometimes the tone, the slang, the way the messages were written felt so much like him that it honestly shook me. Eventually, she introduced this whole belief system about helping spirits cross over. She said spirits were confused and needed help remembering who they were before they could move on. We were encouraged to ask questions that would supposedly help them remember their lives. Looking back now, I know how unusual all of this sounds. But at the time, it felt very real. It felt intense, emotional, and heavy. As it kept going, I started to feel spiritually and emotionally unwell. I felt drained. I felt uneasy. I felt like something was sitting over my life that I couldn't shake. Around that same time, I was deeply involved in New Age practices. I had crystals. I made spell jars. I worked with herbs and other things like that. But little by little, I started feeling convicted that I should not be involved in any of it. Eventually, I decided to step away completely. I blocked her, and I turned fully toward Christ. I bought a Bible. I gave my life to God. I got rid of everything connected to those practices. I cleaned it all out of my life. I still can't fully explain everything that happened. I can't prove all of it, and I understand that people may interpret it differently. But I know what it did to me. It changed me, permanently. And it led me to where I am now. Because if that kind of darkness was real, then I knew the light had to be real too. I'm not here saying I have all the answers. I'm just wondering if anyone else has experienced something that shook them spiritually or emotionally in a way they couldn't easily explain, and somehow pushed them toward faith in God. If you have, I would genuinely be grateful to hear your story. I only ever heard my grandpa tell this story when the weather turned mean. Not just rain tapping politely at the windows, I mean the kind of storm that made the whole house breathe differently. Thunder rolling so hard you felt it in your ribs. Lightning flashing through the curtains and turning the room pale for one strange second. Wind pushing against the chimney like something outside wanted an answer. That was when Grandpa would settle into his chair, lift one hand toward the fireplace, and say, "Put another log on, my little love. This is the night for that story." And I always knew which one he meant. He'd hold his tea close, stare into the fire, and say, "My mother told me this. She swore it happened to her grandfather when he was a boy, right here in New England, before people stopped believing the woods could keep secrets." Then he'd pause, because Grandpa knew how to let silence do some of the work. They had a cat, he'd say, a grand old tabby named Marushka, soft as a scarf and proud as a queen. One spring, she had kittens, 5 of them. 4 were pale and striped, but the last one was black. Not gray, not brown, black, like a corner of the room after the lamp goes out. He always looked at me then, just to make sure I hadn't drifted away. "And your old babushka," he'd say quietly. "She knew there was something wrong with that kitten." They lived in a pale green house near the woods, in a little town where nobody could say their last name right. The family name was Petrova, but most people just called them the Russians and left it at that. It was a good house most days. Nikolai, the father, taught numbers at the local college and could fix almost anything with wire, patience, and muttering. His wife, Elena, baked dark bread that made the whole street smell warm. And their son, 11-year-old Alyosha, was the kind of boy who rescued beetles from the sink and spoke to trees as if they might speak back. Marushka had been with them for years. She had survived the crossing from the old country, 2 bad winters, 1 flooded basement, and Alyosha's toddler years, which, according to Grandpa, proved she had the patience of a saint and the judgment of a general. So when she had kittens beneath the piano bench one damp April morning, Everyone treated it like a blessing. Everyone except Babushka. She stood in the doorway, looked at the black kitten, and crossed herself. "Not that one," she whispered. "You do not keep that one." Elena laughed softly and said, "Mama, it's barely bigger than a mitten." But Babushka didn't laugh. She only tucked her hands into her sleeves and said, "Small doors are still doors." Of course, Alyosha chose the black kitten. Children always seem to pick the thing adults are afraid of. He named her Nika because he said she looked brave and because she was the first one to crawl out of the basket. At first, she seemed perfectly normal. Tiny paws, little needle claws, a squeaky meow that sounded almost embarrassed to exist. But then things began to happen. Alyosha's canary stopped singing one morning and was found stiff in the bottom of its cage, though the cage door was still latched. A jar of preserves shattered in the pantry while no one was near it. At night, footsteps crossed the hallway, soft and slow, even when everyone was in bed. And Nika was always sleeping when they checked on her. Curled up, innocent, sweet as a drop of cream. Elena kept saying, "She's only a kitten." But Babushka began sewing little bundles of herbs into the curtains. She salted the thresholds. She whispered prayers under her breath whenever Nika passed by. Then Alyosha started dreaming. He dreamed something sat at the foot of his bed, something long and folded, something with hands that reached too far and a mouth that breathed cold air over his blankets. One night, he woke screaming so hard Nikolai nearly tore the bedroom door from its hinges. They found Alyosha pressed into the corner, his nightshirt ripped open, thin red scratches running down his chest. "She was on me," he sobbed. "But it wasn't her. Her face opened wrong." Nikolai turned toward the window. Nika was sitting there on the sill, tail moving slowly, eyes black and bright in the lightning. That was when Babushka said, "Enough." Elena cried while Nikolai wrapped the kitten in a wool blanket. Alyosha wouldn't look at her. Nobody wanted to say what they meant to do, because saying it would make them monsters, and not saying it let them pretend they were only frightened people doing what frightened people do. But Babushka led them into the woods behind the house, deeper than Alyosha had ever gone. The storm had not broken yet, but the trees were already moving like they knew it was coming. They reached a circle of old stones half buried in moss. Grandpa said those stones were older than the town, older than the road, older than any name people had given that place. Babushka placed Nika in the center. The kitten did not run. That was the worst part, Grandpa said. She just sat there and watched them, too still for anything so young. Babushka knelt and began to speak in words Alyosha didn't understand. The air grew sharp. The trees stopped rustling. Even the insects went quiet. Then Nika opened her mouth, and the sound that came out was not a kitten's cry. It was low and tearing and too large for that small body. The shadows under the trees pulled toward her, sliding over the ground like spilled ink. For one moment, Alyosha thought he saw shapes inside the darkness. Fingers, teeth, eyes that had been waiting a very long time. The wind rose all at once. Nikolai grabbed Elena. Elena grabbed Alyosha. Babushka kept speaking. Then lightning struck somewhere nearby, close enough to split the night wide open. And just like that, the darkness tore loose from the kitten. It lifted from Nika like smoke, twisted once above the stones, and rushed into the woods. Everything went still. Nobody moved. Then Nika sneezed. A tiny, ridiculous, ordinary kitten sneeze. Elena was the first to run to her. She scooped that little black cat into her arms and wept into her fur. Nika trembled and purred and tucked her face under Elena's chin. Babushka stood there for a long time, staring into the trees. Finally, she crossed herself and said, "It has gone out." They brought Nika home. After that, the house was peaceful again. Alyosha's dreams stopped. The footsteps stopped. The lights no longer flickered. Nothing died strangely. Nothing watched from corners. And Nika grew into the laziest cat in all of New England. She slept in sunbeams, stole butter when no one was looking, and became so round that Nikolai said she was less a cat and more a loaf with opinions. Alyosha loved her for years. She slept on his bed, sat beside his school books, and waited by the door whenever he came home from college. Later, when he had children of his own, Nika was still there, gray around the mouth and slow in the legs but purring like a little engine. Babushka never fully trusted her though. Not completely. Even after 15 quiet years, even after Nika proved, day after day, that she was only a cat. Whenever storms came rolling over the town and the old woods shook in the wind, Babushka would glance toward the trees and lock the back door. Just in case. Because whatever had been inside that kitten had left her. But no one ever found out where it went. And on certain stormy nights, if the thunder was loud enough and the lights flickered just so, they sometimes heard something moving beyond the tree line. Not coming closer exactly. Just searching. Hey, I want to share something that happened to me and my partner just before Father's Day. Something that's been really unsettling. And honestly, I think we're dealing with more than just a coincidence. It all started when we realized we were being followed for quite a while. At least 30 minutes, maybe longer. But we didn't catch it right away. The feeling of being watched, of someone, or something, right behind us was chilling, even though we didn't see anything at first. We made some quick decisions, took a few turns, and finally managed to lose the car that was tailing us before we got home. But that wasn't the end of it. Since that night, things have felt off. I keep seeing this shadowy figure in our front yard. Not just once, but regularly now. It's like it's waiting there, just watching. I've tried to ignore it, really tried. But then yesterday, something happened that shook me. I'd just come inside and was locking the door when suddenly, the doorknob was yanked the opposite way, like someone was trying to pull it open from the outside. For a moment, I just stared at the door, frozen. Then I managed to lock it again, but the unease didn't go away. My partner didn't see it, but when I told him, his face went pale, and he looked really uncomfortable. I asked if he felt anything strange, and he admitted feeling overwhelmed, like something bad was about to happen. Now, it's important to say, while I follow Wicca and am pretty open to these ideas, my partner's not sure how he feels about any of this supernatural stuff. So that reaction told me this was serious. Later, I had to step outside again. And there it was, the figure, standing near my partner's car. What's odd is that it seemed to be interacting with our neighbor's outdoor cat, who had wandered into our yard. The cat was just sitting there, staring up at the figure like they were communicating or something. It was such a strange sight, like something out of a dream. I didn't really connect the dots at the time, but then I remembered something from a couple of weeks before. About 2 weeks ago, we found a dead bird right next to our front steps. The strange thing was, it seemed like its heart had been removed, perfectly, like a small circle was cut out. There was no blood anywhere, which didn't make sense. We planned to bury it when we got back home, but when we returned, it was gone. No trace. We thought maybe a neighborhood cat had taken it, but that didn't add up. The neat hole and lack of blood just seemed too precise to be an animal. And now, looking back, I can't shake the feeling that it was connected to whatever this shadowy presence is. The weird thing is, I do believe we have a positive spirit watching over us too. Since moving in, I've caught glimpses of something good inside the house. At first, it startled me, but it always felt protective. There was even a night when our microwave malfunctioned and unplugged itself right as a fire almost started. If it hadn't done that, we might have lost the house. I'm convinced that was our guardian spirit stepping in, and I think it's the reason this negative entity hasn't been able to come inside, like it's keeping the bad one at bay. To protect ourselves, I've burned sage to cleanse the house, lit white candles to purify the space, and made protective charms for both of us. I'm avoiding putting salt down because we have pets inside, and I worry the neighborhood cats outside might ingest it and get sick. Instead, I'm planning to get some brick dust, which should be safer and still help keep unwanted energies away. So, that's where we're at. I'm really hoping this shadowy figure moves on soon, but I'm preparing as best as I can. It's scary, but I'm holding on to the belief that the positive energy in our home is stronger. I just wanted to share this with someone because it's been weighing on me a lot lately. Hey, I want to share something that happened to me recently. Something a bit unsettling, but very real to me. So, my name's Jame, and just this past month, I helped my uncle move into a new house. It was a pretty big deal for all of us, especially since my brother and I were the first to sleep over in the new place. Meanwhile, my uncle, aunt, and 2 of my cousins stayed back in the old house during the move. The whole process took about 3 days, and we spent 3 nights of the new house. Now, the strange part happened on the very last night, which was when my cousins decided to have a little sleepover with us in the new place. Let me tell you, the old house was already kind of infamous in our family for weird things happening. My uncle would talk about objects disappearing only to reappear days later, and there were always these odd footsteps and voices echoing through the halls. Even my aunt, who's usually pretty skeptical about these things, admitted that it was really strange and hard to explain. I never really liked sleeping in that old place because, honestly, I always felt like something was there, something haunting the house. So I was pretty relieved to be in the new house for a change, thinking I was finally safe. But as it turns out, the weird stuff didn't stay behind. On the final night, around 3 a.m., one of my cousins, Sarah, let's call her that, came over to my bed. She looked pale and told me she was feeling sick, complaining about a stomachache. I helped her back to her room and stayed until she fell asleep, then went back to my own bed. But not long after, maybe 10 minutes in, I started hearing footsteps right above me. They were heavy, deliberate, and way too loud to be my cousins. They're just kids, 8 and 10 years old. Naturally, I got out of bed to check on Sarah, worried she might be up or feeling worse. I quietly checked both my cousins' rooms and found them both sound asleep. That's when the hairs on my neck stood up. How could there be such loud footsteps if no one was moving? I tried to shake off the unease and went back to bed, but barely 10 minutes later, a loud whooshing noise came from downstairs. At first, I thought it might be the wind or something falling, so I waited, hoping it would stop. But it didn't. The sound went on and on, like something powerful moving around the main floor. I couldn't ignore it, so I crept down the stairs, heart pounding in my chest. When I reached the living room, I saw the vacuum cleaner was somehow on, humming loudly on its own. I quickly scanned the area. No one was there. Not a single soul. I unplugged the vacuum, feeling a chill run down my spine, and hurried back upstairs, praying that was the last weird thing for the night. But it wasn't. Around 3:45 a.m., my other cousin, Clara, started calling out Sarah's name, her voice trembling. I got up again to check on Clara, who looked shaken. She said she'd had a nightmare, which seemed normal enough given we were all in a new house without our parents. But what she described was far from an ordinary nightmare. She said she saw a tall man standing silently in her doorway, just staring at her. The image was so vivid and disturbing that I could tell it really scared her. I comforted her as best as I could, and after about 20 minutes, she finally drifted back to sleep. I went back to my room, but honestly, I knew I wouldn't get any sleep the rest of the night. I haven't told my uncle about all this yet. I don't want to add any stress to their big move. I don't really know what I experienced that night, but it shook me to my core. And even now, whenever I think back, I can still hear those heavy footsteps echoing above me and see that silent figure standing in the doorway. It's like the old house's shadows followed us, refusing to let go. Thanks for listening. Sometimes sharing these stories makes them a little less scary. Hey, I want to share something that's been really weighing on me lately, about a close friend of mine. Let's call her Clara, just to keep things private. You know, Clara was always someone full of light, easygoing, carefree, the kind of person you could just be around and feel at ease. But over the past few weeks, something terribly wrong has been happening to her. So it all started a few weeks ago when Clara was at her house with her boyfriend and another couple. It was supposed to be just a normal evening, but suddenly, Clara began screaming. Really loud, frantic screams. Then she started scratching herself, not just absent-mindedly, but like she was trying to claw something off her skin. And the most unsettling part was how she started speaking gibberish, words that made no sense, almost like a language I'd never heard before, all while she was just lying there in bed. It was terrifying. Her boyfriend called an ambulance and she was rushed to the hospital. But then, just about an hour or so after she got home, she started feeling unwell again and drove herself back to the hospital. She stayed there through the night. The next day, things got even more unsettling. Clara showed up at their house trying to take one of their kids with her. They have 4 children, by the way. Apparently, she had walked back from the hospital to their house, leaving her car behind. Now, the walk isn't exactly short or easy. It's not like she could just casually stroll that distance, especially not in her condition. Her boyfriend was really shaken up when he saw the car missing. He refused to let her take the child, which I think was the right call, but that moment just felt so eerie. Then Clara was back in the hospital for about 2 weeks. During that time, she made it clear that no one could visit her. She didn't have any way to communicate either because she'd left her phone at home. It was like she was completely cut off. When she finally got out, she was discharged with medication for new health problems. Turns out she had suffered a heart attack and a stroke, and she's only 29. Before all this, being around Clara was so easy, so lighthearted. But now, it's like she's not herself. Like something else is pretending to be her. Menacing. Negative. That's the only way I can describe it. For about a month now, Clara's been experiencing really strange things in her home. Things that I, unfortunately, have witnessed myself on occasion. Like toys lighting up on top of the fridge when no one is around, or a bubble gun suddenly blowing bubbles in the kitchen, all by itself. And Clara believes that these are signs from her deceased son, who died about 4 years ago, just a day or two after he was born. Clara is a practicing witch, not one to label herself under any particular tradition, but she's been drawing odd symbols outside her home, scattered all around without any obvious order. She talks about feeling her son's presence when she practices. I remember seeing her altar before, and it was such a positive, cheerful space filled with love and light. But now, the altar just feels wrong, like it's been tainted or corrupted somehow. Being in her house now is almost unbearable. And talking with Clara, it's not the easy, genuine conversation it used to be. It feels like there's something in there, something trying to act like her, trying to gather information from us. It's chilling. I don't know what's going on exactly. Maybe it's the trauma, or maybe it's something darker. But I felt like I had to share this because it's been haunting me. Have any of you ever experienced something like this? Something that feels like a person you love isn't really themselves anymore? Because that's exactly what it feels like with Clara. want to share this really strange experience I had on the Beijing subway recently. So here's the background first. I just landed this amazing new job last month after leaving my terrible old employer. You know, the kind of place where you're stuck in a 996 schedule? That's working from 9 in the morning until 9 at night, 6 days a week. Absolutely exhausting. But now my schedule is way better, and honestly, everything feels perfect, except for one thing. The IT department I'm working for is located so far from my apartment. My daily commute is a bit of an ordeal. I have to hop on line 1, then switch to line 9, and finally transfer to line 16 to get to the office. It's a long trip. Fortunately, my manager is really understanding. Usually, I get to work in a different department's office that's much closer. But because of this ongoing COVID-19 situation, starting last week, we were told to work strictly from our own offices. So now, I'm forced to make this long subway commute every day, which is, well, it's tiring to say the least. Now, here's the thing. Aside from the long hours underground, I actually don't mind the subway trip that much. There's this one part of the route that I genuinely enjoy. The transfer tunnel between line 9 and line 16 at the National Library station. It's super cool. Unlike older subway tunnels built in the 90s, this one is spacious and beautifully designed. The walls are lined with smooth, glossy marble, and the entire tunnel is lit up with thousands of tiny LED lights that sparkle like stars. It feels like walking through a futuristic corridor, bright and welcoming. Honestly, it's the highlight of my daily subway travel. I often find myself slowing down just to take in the atmosphere, watching the light reflections dance along the polished floors. But last Wednesday, something felt off. When I got to the transfer point from line 9 to line 16, I had this nagging feeling that I hadn't passed through that beautiful, shining tunnel at all. It struck me because I always remember walking through it. It's become kind of my little daily joy. But this time, I had no memory of it. I kept trying to picture myself walking through those glossy marble walls, but it was like the tunnel had vanished. When I finally got to the office that day, this weird feeling just wouldn't leave me. My mind was foggy, and I couldn't focus on work. I kept thinking, how did I get from line 9 to line 16 if not through that tunnel? And then, bit by bit, some hazy memories started to come back, but they weren't of that beautiful tunnel. Instead, I remembered walking through a narrow, dimly lit tunnel. It was crowded with people, and I felt pushed and squeezed by the slow-moving crowd. The tunnel looked old, like one of those grim 90s-era stations. The walls were dull and worn, and the lighting was this harsh, flickering fluorescent tube light. It was cold and damp. The air felt heavy and unwelcoming. What really got me was the feeling of being rushed and shoved forward by the crowd. I didn't stop or look around. I was just swept along. And here's the thing. I have never seen that kind of tunnel at National Library Station before. That station is new and modern, so an old, grimy tunnel like that just doesn't fit. It felt totally out of place. Even now, when I think back on that moment, I can almost feel the cold, wet air on my skin, and I can still hear the muffled sounds of footsteps and murmurs echoing in that narrow tunnel. It's such a strange sensation, like I stepped into a completely different world for a few minutes. I really wanted to brush it off as a sleepy morning mix-up, maybe my brain playing tricks on me. But then, something similar happened again on Friday and Monday. I still can't quite explain it, and it's been bugging me all week. I guess I'll keep an eye out next time during my commute and maybe talk about it again. For now, though, I have to go walk my absolutely cutest dog in the world. He's waiting for me, tail wagging and all excited. Thanks for listening to my story. I hope it wasn't too weird or spooky, but honestly, I'm still trying to wrap my head around it myself. Hey, I want want to share with you a story that's been with me for years, something that really shook my family and me to the core. It's about a night when the ordinary world we knew slipped away, and something unexplainable stepped in. This happened in Connecticut, where I grew up, around the time Ed Warren had just passed or shortly after. And it involves my family, my cousins, and the famous Lorraine Warren herself. So, picture this. I was about 14, and my dad and I were staying over at my aunt's house. The house was a two-family home. My aunt and uncle lived on one side, and my cousin and her family on the other. It was a brand new house, just built a couple of months before we stayed there. Later, I learned some things about this house that made that night even more chilling. In the days before that night, my aunt had been having these really intense dreams. Or at least, she thought they were dreams. Every night, a little boy would appear to her, trying to lead her out of bed. She said the outside of the house was glowing with this unbelievably bright light that poured through the windows. So bright, she couldn't even see outside clearly. And that little boy, he kept trying to lead her outside, like he was beckoning her somewhere. The next mornings were always strange. My uncle would find my aunt passed out in odd places. The bathroom floor, the living room, even once in the garage. At first, they thought she was just sleepwalking, but something about it didn't sit right. Now, on to the night itself. It was around 2 a.m. when suddenly this terrible scream echoed from the upstairs living room. It was loud, desperate, the kind of scream that makes your heart pound and your skin crawl. My dad, my aunt, my uncle, and I all woke up instantly, our blood running cold. We ran upstairs, fearing someone was hurt. When we got there, my cousin and her husband were in the living room, clearly shaken. Their son, he was about 2 years younger than me, sat in a rocking chair, his back to us. Something was off. The moment my uncle touched his shoulder, the boy turned around, and we saw his face. It was terrifying. His skin was turning this strange grayish color, like the life was draining out of him, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild. We tried asking him what was wrong, but he started speaking in Latin. Not just a few words, long sentences, guttural and eerie, as if some otherworldly voice was coming through him. He rocked back and forth in the chair, like he was trapped inside his own body. Now, the kid was known to be a bit of a prankster, so my uncle and cousin's husband thought he was messing around. They yelled at him to stop and went to pull him out of the chair. But the moment they touched him, he screamed again, this time louder, more guttural, with those wild eyes rolling back into his head. The room was thick with fear. We didn't know what to do. My cousin rushed to grab a glass of water, thinking maybe this was sleepwalking or some kind of seizure, and threw it on him. But instead of waking him, he just laughed. A deep, haunting laugh that didn't sound like him at all. My aunt, who was a deeply religious woman, suddenly ran downstairs and grabbed some holy water and crosses she kept in the house. At that moment, we all realized this was more than a prank or a medical issue. My dad and uncle managed to get the boy out of the rocking chair, holding him down as he struggled and kicked like a trapped animal. My aunt came back, holy water in hand, and cautiously touched his back. I watched in frozen horror as the skin beneath her hand seemed to burn. A mark the exact shape of her palm appeared on his grayish skin. He screamed, a raw and pained sound, before finally going limp and passing out. I stood there, unable to move, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. Everything felt unreal, like we were trapped in some nightmare we couldn't wake up from. We called the police around 3 a.m., and soon paramedics arrived. They examined my cousin's son, who thankfully woke up, though the burn mark on his back remained. The police were just as baffled as we were and suggested we reach out to Mrs. Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigator who lived nearby. No one slept that night. My dad and I left the next morning, but the story didn't end there. About a week later, my aunt called Lorraine Warren and invited her to the house. From the moment Mrs. Warren stepped inside, she knew something was deeply wrong. She revealed that the land the house was built on was a kind of portal to another dimension, a gateway that shouldn't have been disturbed. The little boy from my aunt's dreams, she explained, was actually trying to guide her outside through this portal. If a human crossed through it, it would open the door for demons to enter our world. One had slipped through and possessed my cousin's son because he wasn't strong enough to fight it off. Lorraine Warren conducted a seance and a thorough cleansing of the house, working to close the portal and banish the dark presence. After that, my family lived in that house for another 8 years without a single problem before they finally sold it and moved away. I never stayed there again after that night. Even now, years later, the memory still haunts me. That terrifying scream, the burning mark, and the feeling of something cold and evil creeping into our lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the world we know is just a thin veil over something much darker. You know, this is one of those things I've gone back and forth on for years, because I don't want to force a supernatural explanation onto something that might have had a very human one. But I also know what I felt. My older cousin had dealt with schizophrenia since he was very young. I know people have opinions about childhood schizophrenia, but that's not really the point here. Growing up, he used to say he could hear people talking behind him, whispering about him, watching him somehow. He could never prove it, of course, but to him it was completely real. The schizophrenia came from his mother's side of the family, and we're related through his father's side, so I never worried about it being something I might have inherited too. For a while, he lived back and forth between our house and a psychiatric facility in the next town over. At the time this happened, he was staying with us, and he was actually doing better than usual. He was taking his medication regularly, and for once it seemed like the doctors had found the right mix. We didn't have a spare room, so we turned part of the dining room into a little makeshift bedroom for him. It had a mattress, a couple of temporary wall panels, one small door, and this huge TV that honestly took up way too much space. There were 2 tall windows in there, but he always kept them covered because he was convinced the neighbors could see him. The whole space was tiny, maybe 9 or 10 feet long and around 5 feet wide. It wasn't really a room so much as a pocket of privacy. One afternoon, my mom started calling for him from the other side of the house. She called once, then again, then louder. By the 5th time, I figured he just couldn't hear her, so I went over to his little room to tell him. I opened the door, and I stopped immediately. He was sitting on the mattress with his back partly turned toward me. He had noise-canceling headphones on, his eyes were closed, and he looked completely calm, like he was listening to music or watching something on the TV. He clearly hadn't heard my mom at all. But the room felt wrong. Not scary in a dramatic way. Not like the air turned cold or the lights flickered. It was quieter than that. Heavier. There was a space on the mattress behind him, and as I looked at him, I became aware of something there. I couldn't see it clearly, not like a person standing in front of me. It was more like a hunched, faint shape, almost translucent, angled toward him. It wasn't standing up. There wasn't enough room for that anyway. It was crouched or folded somehow, right behind him on the mattress, facing him while he sat there with his eyes closed, completely unaware. And the strangest part was that it didn't feel like it noticed me at all. I stood there for maybe half a minute, not saying anything. I was just staring at that empty spot behind him, trying to decide whether my mind was filling in shadows or whether something was actually there. Then, out of nowhere, he shouted, "Oh crap," and whipped around. He looked directly at the exact same empty spot I had been staring at. His eyes were huge. Then he looked at me, and I must have looked just as shocked as he did. Neither of us said anything about it. I think we both knew there was something to say, but neither of us wanted to be the one to say it first. I also didn't want to make things worse for him. I didn't want to confirm something that might feed into his fear or trigger him somehow. So I just said, "My mom's been calling you. You should go see what she needs." And that was it. He got up, walked past me, and we both left the room without looking back. Whatever had been on that mattress, or whatever we thought had been there, we ignored it like it was a spill nobody wanted to clean up. A couple of months later, his condition got worse again, and he moved out. We turned that little space back into a dining room, and nothing strange ever happened in that area afterward. Not before, not after. Over the years, we've cleansed the house a few times for different reasons, but I've never really connected any of that to what happened in his room that day. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm sitting alone on my laptop, I still get the feeling that someone is behind me. Not often, but enough that I notice. I don't usually feel threatened by it. My general rule is, if they don't bother me, I don't bother them. Although I will say, there are certain private moments where I mentally give any unseen guests a fair chance to leave the room. Boundaries matter, even with the dead. My family believes in spirits. We believe people can linger after they pass. But we don't believe in demons, and I don't use that word for what my cousin and I sensed. That idea was never part of how I was raised, and it doesn't feel right to me. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe my cousin was having a bad moment, and I picked up on his fear. Maybe I imagined a presence because I already knew the things he struggled with. But then again, he turned around and looked at the exact spot I had been staring at. And after all these years, that's the part I still can't explain. I usually tell stories about things I haven't actually lived through, things that come to me during meditation or in those strange, quiet moments when your mind starts opening little hidden doors. But this one is different. This happened to me for real when I was around 12 years old, and even now, years later, my family still brings it up from time to time. I want to say this clearly before I begin. I still don't know what that man was. Maybe he was just a very strange, unsettling person. Maybe there was something wrong with him. Or maybe he was something else entirely. I'm not here to force one answer. I'm just going to tell you exactly how it felt. At the time, we were living in a small mountain town in Greece. It was the kind of place where everybody knew everybody, where news traveled faster than the wind, and where the mountains always seemed to be watching from the edges of town. Ever since I was little, I had always been drawn to the paranormal. Spirits, aliens, strange energies, old stories, all of it fascinated me. I wasn't obsessed in a dramatic way, but I always felt like there was more around us than people were willing to admit. One evening, it was early autumn, probably late September. My grandmother, my mother, and I decided to go for a walk. It was around 6 in the evening, still light outside, but the sun was starting to soften. We chose a road that climbed up toward the mountains. That road was beautiful, honestly. Dense trees on both sides, insects buzzing in the brush, the smell of dry earth and leaves, and farther up, you could sometimes hear sheep or goats from nearby farms. If you kept walking long enough, the road opened into this wide view where you could see the whole town below you. It wasn't a famous hiking spot or anything like that. It was just one of those places locals knew. There were also stories about that area. People used to whisper about fairies in the woods, strange beings, lights, presences. I wouldn't exactly call it haunted, but even as a child, I could feel something there. The air felt different, almost charged. Years later, when I got deeper into meditation, and started exploring the idea of communicating with extraterrestrial consciousness, I would sometimes think back to that mountain. I know how it sounds, but I always had this feeling that the area was somehow connected to something. Maybe not a literal base hidden underground, though that thought did cross my mind. More like a place where the veil was thin, where messages could pass through more easily. Anyway, that evening started normally. We were walking and talking, just like we always did. We passed a couple of people from town, exchanged greetings, and everything felt ordinary. Peaceful, even. But the farther we went, the quieter it became. At some point, there were no voices, no people, no movement around us. Just the road, the trees, and the three of us. That didn't scare us at first. We knew the area. We had lived there our whole lives. Then the feeling changed. It was sudden. The whole atmosphere seemed to tighten. A few seconds later, we heard heavy footsteps coming from ahead of us. Not human footsteps. Dogs. Large dogs. And in that area, dogs were not cute little pets trotting around with ribbons on their collars. These were huge guard dogs that farmers kept to protect their animals. They could be aggressive, especially if they didn't know you. The road was narrow, so we couldn't really move aside. We had two choices: keep going and hope the dogs were controlled, or turn around and go home. We stopped for a moment, trying to decide what to do. Then a man appeared. He came out from the shadows of the trees, holding 3 massive dogs. I remember him being tall, maybe around 180 meters, thin, with dark hair and dark eyes. He was wearing a large, heavy coat that looked too bulky for the weather. There was nothing visibly monstrous about him. He didn't have some terrifying face or dramatic evil expression. But the moment I saw him, something in me went cold. Everything about him felt wrong. My grandmother, who was not exactly known for being calm in stressful situations, stopped a little ahead of us. She was close enough to speak to him, so she called out and asked him to hold the dogs tightly so we could pass safely. He didn't answer. He didn't even look at us. That alone was strange. In a town that small, people respond. Even strangers respond. Even if he had been a tourist, even if he didn't speak our language, there should have been some kind of reaction. A glance, a nod, a confused expression, anything. But there was nothing. My grandmother tried again, more politely at first. She asked him to please pull the dogs closer. Still nothing. The dogs were there, huge and tense, and he just kept standing with his eyes lowered, staring at the ground. After a few minutes, my grandmother started getting frightened and angry. She raised her voice. Then she started yelling. She used some harsh words too, which maybe wasn't the best idea, but we were scared, and she was trying to protect us. Still, the man gave absolutely no reaction. That is the part I can't explain. He didn't blink in surprise. He didn't look annoyed. He didn't look embarrassed. He didn't look angry. He didn't look humanly uncomfortable in any way. His eyes stayed fixed on the ground. His face was completely blank, like stone. Not peaceful, not distracted, not shy. Empty. And he kept moving slowly toward us. I know someone could say maybe he was rude, or maybe he had social issues, or maybe he simply didn't want to interact. But this was different. Even the most introverted person alive would react if an elderly woman was yelling at them and a terrified child was crying nearby. But he didn't. It was like we were invisible to him, or like he was physically there, but whatever was inside him wasn't fully present. That sounds dramatic, I know, but standing there, watching him come closer with those dogs in that expressionless face, it felt robotic, unnatural. Like the rules of normal human behavior had quietly stepped out of the room. Eventually, we realized we couldn't risk passing him. So we turned around and ran. We ran all the way back down the road toward home, shaken and breathless, and none of us knew what to say at first. To this day, I'm not claiming he was definitely an alien or a spirit or anything like that. I don't know what he was. But I do know this. Something about him was not right. And out of all the strange feelings I've had in my life, that encounter on the mountain road is still one of the most disturbing things I've ever experienced. Honestly, this has been going on for years now, and it's the whole reason I won't keep an alarm clock in my room anymore. It started about 7 years ago with my dad's old alarm clock. At first, I figured he was messing with me. It would happen on the first night I was home alone, and I'd just go into his room, unplug the thing, and try not to think too much about it. But then it started happening the day after I'd been home alone, and from what I knew, that alarm clock wasn't some fancy programmable thing. You could set one daily alarm, and that was basically it. My dad isn't really the prankster type either. He barely jokes around like that, so the more it happened, the less funny it felt. At first, he didn't believe me. I don't really blame him. It sounded ridiculous. But I kept bringing it up, especially because our dog started acting terrified of his bedroom closet, and only when I was alone in the house. Later on, around late middle school, I got my own alarm clock. For a while, everything was normal. Then one night, again while I was home alone, it suddenly switched over to the radio setting by itself. It wasn't even clear music. It was static, distorted voices, and these weird overlapping sounds, like two radio stations fighting over the same signal. I managed to mess with the settings and got it to stop for a few months. Then it happened again, and this time it wouldn't stop making those warped radio noises. I told myself it was just old and buggy, because that was easier than thinking about anything else. My dad finally believed me around that time. I was at a friend's house one night when he called me around midnight. He sounded unsettled. He said the dogs were doing exactly what I had described before. Milo was under the bed barking like crazy, and Copper was standing stiff in front of the closet, barking at it like he was guarding my dad from something. Those dogs had never acted like that over anything else. Copper especially never barked at people inside the house. But that night, once my dad got to the room, Milo bolted out from under the bed, and Copper stayed glued to his leg until they were away from the bedroom. The next day, when I got home, my dad told me something else. He said the alarm clock had gone off at around 2:40 in the morning, just like I'd been telling him. After that, he got rid of it and didn't use an alarm clock for almost a year. More recently, over the last couple of years, my dad has been going on short business trips, usually 3 or 4 days, sometimes 5. When he's gone, I stay home to take care of the dogs and the chickens. He has a newer alarm clock now. It has gentle sound settings, like rain, ocean waves, soft music, that kind of thing. And, sure enough, when I'm alone in the house, it turns on by itself sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning. It starts quiet, then slowly gets louder over the next hour or so. I live upstairs now, and I basically have my own little apartment up there, so I usually only notice it if I'm downstairs, heading to the bathroom, or grabbing something to eat. But sometimes, even the rain or beach sounds get loud enough that I can hear them from the top of the stairs unless my door is closed. I've never gone into his room while it's happening. I just stay upstairs and try to ignore it. Eventually, it stops on its own. Sometimes it happens the first night he's gone, sometimes the second or third. Once it happens, I unplug it. Lately, I've started unplugging it on the first day, just so I don't have to deal with it at all. I've checked the settings before. There's never any routine set up, no hidden timer, nothing. My dad says he doesn't even use the alarm unless he has to wake up early, and even then, he sets it for 5 a.m. at the earliest. I'm not saying the house is haunted. I don't really know what I'm saying, to be honest. These are just the main strange things that happen here. There have been a few other moments, though. Like my dad texting me while I'm out, asking if I'm home. Or last year, when he thought my ex was upstairs while I was at work, because he heard footsteps or movement in my room around 9 or 10 at night. I usually just chalk that up to the house settling, or creaking, or whatever houses do at night. But there's something else too, and I don't know if it's connected. This part stopped years ago, probably around 12 years back. But when I was in elementary school, before my older sister moved out, I used to occasionally see what looked like me standing at the end of the upstairs hallway near my old bedroom. At the same time, my sister claimed she kept seeing a man standing in front of my door at night. She said he looked like an uncle on her mom's side who had passed away, someone she had been close to. I never saw him myself. For a while, we didn't really believe each other. Then one night, I saw my sister from my room. She was peeking out of her doorway, staring straight through mine with this terrified look on her face. Then she ran to the bathroom. When she came back out, she did the same thing again, just staring. I called her name 3 times, and she didn't answer once. Later, when she was home alone with me, she called my name from the living room, sounding confused. I was literally in the next room playing with the dogs, so I asked her why she was yelling for me. She looked at me, then looked up the stairs, and told me she swore she had just seen me peeking my head out from behind the upstairs wall, staring at her. The look on her face told me she wasn't joking. She acted different for the rest of the night and kept checking the stairs every so often. Around that same time, I came home from school while my mom was having surgery and my dad was with her. When I walked in, I heard my mom call my name from their bedroom. I thought it was strange, but I figured maybe the surgery had ended early and my dad had gone to work. I went to their room. Nobody was there. I called back a few times. I checked the bathroom, the closet, everywhere. Nothing. For a while that same month, my sister and I were both woken up a few times by what sounded like someone walking outside our windows. We'd hear rocks from the front path being kicked around or thrown against the side of the house. The house isn't old. It was built for us when I was about 3, so it's not like there were previous owners or some long history attached to it. But every weird thing that has ever happened there seems to happen upstairs, in the hallway, or near the closet in my dad's room. I'm bringing all this up because, from what I've read from other people, it almost sounds like a mimic. Something copying voices, faces, and familiar sounds. And the strangest part is that, except for the things my sister experienced, it almost always happens when someone is home alone. Hey, I want to share with you a story that's been with me for years. Something that really shook my family and me to the core. It's about a night when the ordinary world we knew slipped away, and something unexplainable stepped in. This happened in Connecticut, where I grew up, around the time Ed Warren had just passed, or shortly after. And it involves my family, my cousins, and the famous Lorraine Warren herself. So, picture this. I was about 14, and my dad and I were staying over at my aunt's house. The house was a 2-family home. My aunt and uncle lived on one side, and my cousin and her family on the other. It was a brand new house, just built a couple of months before we stayed there. Later, I learned some things about this house that made that night even more chilling. In the days before that night, my aunt had been having these really intense dreams. Or at least, she thought they were dreams. Every night, a little boy would appear to her, trying to lead her out of bed. She said the outside of the house was glowing with this unbelievably bright light that poured through the windows. So bright she couldn't even see outside clearly. And that little boy, He kept trying to lead her outside, like he was beckoning her somewhere. The next mornings were always strange. My uncle would find my aunt passed out in odd places: the bathroom floor, the living room, even once in the garage. At first, they thought she was just sleepwalking, but something about it didn't sit right. Now, on to the night itself. It was around 2 a.m. when suddenly this terrible scream echoed from the upstairs living room. It was loud, desperate, the kind of scream that makes your heart pound and your skin crawl. My dad, my aunt, my uncle, and I all woke up instantly, our blood running cold. We ran upstairs, fearing someone was hurt. When we got there, my cousin and her husband were in the living room, clearly shaken. Their son, he was about 2 years younger than me, sat in a rocking chair, his back to us. Something was off. The moment my uncle touched his shoulder, the boy turned around and we saw his face. It was terrifying. His skin was turning this strange grayish color, like the life was draining out of him, and his eyes were bloodshot and wild. We tried asking him what was wrong, but he started speaking in Latin. Not just a few words, long sentences, guttural and eerie, as if some otherworldly voice was coming through him. He rocked back and forth in the chair, like he was trapped inside his own body. Now, the kid was known to be a bit of a prankster, so my uncle and cousin's husband thought he was messing around. They yelled at him to stop and went to pull him out of the chair. But the moment they touched him, he screamed again, this time louder, more guttural, with those wild eyes rolling back into his head. The room was thick with fear. We didn't know what to do. My cousin rushed to grab a glass of water, thinking maybe this was sleepwalking or some kind of seizure, and threw it on him. But instead of waking him, he just laughed. A deep, haunting laugh that didn't sound like him at all. My aunt, who was a deeply religious woman, suddenly ran downstairs and grabbed some holy water and crosses she kept in the house. At that moment, we all realized this was more than a prank or a medical issue. My dad and uncle managed to get the boy out of the rocking chair, holding him down as he struggled and kicked like a trapped animal. My aunt came back, holy water in hand, and cautiously touched his back. I watched in frozen horror as the skin beneath her hand seemed to burn. A mark the exact shape of her palm appeared on his grayish skin. He screamed, a raw and pained sound, before finally going limp and passing out. I stood there, unable to move, my heart pounding so loud I thought it would burst. Everything felt unreal, like we were trapped in some nightmare we couldn't wake up from. We called the police around 3 a.m., and soon paramedics arrived. They examined my cousin's son, who thankfully woke up, though the burn mark on his back remained. The police were just as baffled as we were, and suggested we reach out to Mrs. Lorraine Warren, the famous paranormal investigator who lived nearby. No one slept that night. My dad and I left the next morning, but the story didn't end there. About a week later, my aunt called Lorraine Warren and invited her to the house. From the moment Mrs. Warren stepped inside, she knew something was deeply wrong. She revealed that the land the house was built on was a kind of portal to another dimension, a gateway that shouldn't have been disturbed. The little boy from my aunt's dreams, she explained, was actually trying to guide her outside through this portal. If a human crossed through it, it would open the door for demons to enter our world. One had slipped through and possessed my cousin's son because he wasn't strong enough to fight it off. Lorraine Warren conducted a seance and a thorough cleansing of the house, working to close the portal and banish the dark presence. After that, my family lived in that house for another 8 years without a single problem before they finally sold it and moved away. I never stayed there again after that night. Even now, years later, the memory still haunts me. That terrifying scream, the burning mark, and the feeling of something cold and evil creeping into our lives. It's a reminder that sometimes the world we know is just a thin veil over something much darker. This happened around 26 years ago, when I was probably 3 or 4 years old. My family was living in a worn-down apartment building just outside Mexico City, in one of those places that wasn't exactly frightening, but definitely felt like it had been forgotten by whoever was supposed to take care of it. Our apartment was small. You'd walk in through the living room, and from there was this tiny little space, barely a hallway, that led to 3 rooms. My parents' bedroom was straight ahead, my room was off to one side, and the bathroom was on the other. At that age, I apparently had a hard time staying in bed. My mother used to tell me I'd get up after bedtime, wander around, or just lie there wide awake and cheerful, greeting her like sleep was a rumor I had no intention of believing. So one night, after struggling to get me settled, she left my bedroom door open while she finished getting ready for bed. She wanted to keep an eye on me from the hallway. My father was already in their room, lying in bed with a book. At some point, my mother went into the bathroom to wipe things down quickly before going to sleep. While she was in there, she glanced across the little hallway into my bedroom, and she saw a child standing at the foot of my bed. He was dressed in white, just standing there quietly, looking toward her. At first, she thought it was me. She was ready to step out and tell me to get back under the covers. But when she moved into the hallway, she saw me lying in bed, asleep, my head on the pillow. The child was still standing there. She didn't describe it as terrifying. That's the part that always stayed with me. She never told the story like a horror story. She said she froze, but not because she felt danger. It was more like she was stunned, like she had walked into a moment that wasn't meant to be explained. Without taking her eyes off him, she called softly for my father to come, and just before he reached the doorway, the child vanished. Not ran, not ducked away, not slipped behind furniture, just gone. I know people might say someone could have climbed in or out somehow, but the timing never made much sense to me. We were not on the ground level, and the room was small. There wasn't much space for someone to hide, and my mother wasn't the kind of person who made up stories like this. Years later, I asked her about it several times. She never gave me a perfect description. She said the boy looked like me, but older. Maybe 8 or 9 years old, maybe 10. I never knew whether she meant he looked like an older version of me, or just that he had the same dark hair and pale skin. She was Catholic, though not especially strict about it. She never came right out and said she thought he was an angel. But the way she spoke about him, with that quiet wonder in her voice, made me think that might have been what she believed. I don't remember any of it myself. My memories start a little after that time. So all I really have is her story. A tired apartment, a little open doorway, me asleep in bed, and a boy in white standing watch at the foot of it. You know, there are some names that don't just fade into history. They linger. In Thailand, one of those names was Sia Wee. For decades, people spoke his name like a warning. To many, he was remembered as something terrifying, a child killer, a cannibal, a man turned into a symbol of pure evil. Parents would even frighten their children with him, saying, "Behave, or Sia Wee will come and get you." But when you look closer at his story, something starts to feel uneasy in a different way. Not only because of what he was accused of doing, but because of what people may have misunderstood. Sia Wee was not born in Thailand. He was born around the late 1920s in a poor village in Guangdong, China. His childhood was marked by hunger, hardship, and being treated cruelly by others. Then war came, and like many young men of that time, he was pulled into violence he never asked for, surviving years of conflict and instability. In the late 1940s, he left China and came to Thailand alone, hoping life might finally become gentler. But it didn't. He arrived with almost nothing. He could not speak Thai well. He had no relatives nearby, no real protection, and no place where he truly belonged. He moved from town to town, taking whatever work he could find, carrying goods, tending gardens, helping in markets, doing exhausting jobs his body was barely strong enough to handle. And because he was poor, foreign, quiet, and different, people often mocked him. They pushed him away. They treated him like someone already half outside the world. Even his name was changed by mistake. The name he was born with was recorded incorrectly by officials, and over time, that error became the name everyone knew. In a strange and painful way, even his identity was taken from him. Then, as the years passed, darker rumors began to gather around him. Sia Wee had grown up hearing old folk beliefs, including the idea that eating certain human organs could give a person strength, courage, or health. To most people, that sounds horrifying. But when someone has lived through hunger, illness, war, and fear, old superstitions can twist themselves into something that feels like desperate logic. By the 1950s, children had gone missing in different parts of Thailand, and suspicion eventually fell on him. He was arrested and accused in several cases. But this is where the story becomes more complicated than the legend allows. Only one case had strong physical evidence. In 1958, he was caught in Rayong while burning the body of a young boy. That case became the center of the prosecution against him. The other accusations relied heavily on confessions, and those confessions were reportedly made through translation, under pressure, and without the kind of clear evidence people later assumed existed. At one point, he was said to have admitted to tasting human flesh. Later, he denied it. But by then, the public had already made up its mind. Newspapers called him a monster. They called him a cannibal. Fear spread quickly, and once that fear found a face, it held on tightly. In court, Sia Wee was first sentenced to life in prison. After an appeal, the sentence changed. In 1959, he was executed. But there is one detail that matters deeply. He was officially convicted of only one murder. He was never legally convicted of cannibalism. And yet, that is the word history chained to him. After his death, his body was preserved and displayed in a medical museum for more than 60 years. Visitors would stand in front of his dried remains, reading a label that identified him as a cannibal. For generations, that display helped turn a man into a permanent nightmare. His story slipped out of the courtroom and became folklore. People told ghost stories about him. Some said his spirit wandered at night. Others claimed he appeared in dreams. Movies, rumors, and retellings kept shaping him into one of Thailand's most infamous monsters. But in recent years, people began asking harder questions. In 2019, a petition called for the museum to remove the word cannibal from his display, because that accusation had never been legally proven. The display was eventually removed, and in 2020, his body was cremated in a formal ceremony. No family came to claim him. And that detail feels painfully quiet, doesn't it? Today, some researchers believe his confessions may have been affected by poor translation, fear, pressure during interrogation, or even coercion. Others point to the anti-Chinese prejudice that existed at the time and wonder whether he became an easy target for a frightened society. So we are left with a difficult question. Was Sia Wee truly the monster people said he was? Or was he a lonely, damaged man who became something larger than himself because fear needed a name? Maybe the horror of this story is not only in the crime. Maybe it is also in how quickly a human being can become a legend, and how hard it is to pull the truth back out once fear has swallowed it whole. I've always felt like my family carries something unusual with them. Not in a loud way, not in a way anyone really tries to explain. It's just there, woven into both sides of where we come from. My dad's side is Irish, and my mom's family is Greek. And growing up around both of those cultures, I always had this sense that people didn't treat the unseen as impossible. They took certain feelings seriously. Dreams, instincts, warnings, strange little signs. Things like that weren't brushed off as quickly in my family. My grandmother, especially, has always had this strange ability to sense when something terrible is about to happen. It's happened more than once, but the story that always stays with me is what happened to my mom when she was younger. My mom used to ride horses, and one day, out of nowhere, my grandmother got this overwhelming urge to drive along the route my mom usually took. She didn't even know for sure that my mom was out riding that day. She just felt like she had to go. And when she got there, she found my mom unconscious on the ground, bleeding, after she'd fallen head first from her horse. The part that still gives me chills is that earlier that same morning, my grandmother had randomly thought, "What if she doesn't wear her helmet today?" Which made no sense, because my mom always wore one. But that day, the strap on her helmet had broken, and she decided to ride without it. Then there's my dad. He's always had these odd little flashes of knowing. He'll wake up and think something like, "I hope the car battery isn't dead." And then, of course, he'll go outside and the car won't start. One time, that instinct may have saved me. I'd told him I didn't need a lift home from school because it was a nice afternoon, and where we lived, the walk was actually beautiful. Quiet roads, fields, that kind of countryside stillness. But while he was working, he suddenly got this urgent feeling that he needed to go look for me. He couldn't explain it. He just got up and went. He drove the whole route from school to our house, and eventually, he found me being followed and chased by two men. I don't really like thinking about what might have happened if he'd ignored that feeling. There's also something strange about the way my siblings and I were named. After my oldest brother was born, my dad bought our family home. At the very back of the garden, there was an old well. He hated the idea of a child falling into it, so one day, he decided to take it apart. As he was removing the bricks, he found 5 of them with names carved into them. First, he found one with my oldest brother's name. Then 2 bricks fell together, both with boys' names on them. After that, he found one with a girl's name, and then another girl's name. And that's the exact order we were born in. My oldest brother first, then twin boys, then me, Clara, then my younger sister. So yes, technically, I was named after a brick. Which sounds ridiculous until you hear the rest of it. The boys' names were very Irish. My name was connected to Francis, which is a name that runs through the men in my family. And my sister's name meant Ireland. My dad had moved away from Ireland when he was about 9, after his father died. So it always felt like those names were somehow tied back to him. Then, when I was 8, I saw someone in the house. I remember seeing a man standing by a window, waving at me. I didn't know who he was. I didn't even really think about the grandfather I'd never met. He felt almost unreal to me, like someone from a story no one had fully told. But when I described him to my dad, he went completely still. I described his clothes, his hair, the way he looked. And then I mentioned that there was foam on one side of his face. That was when my dad froze. His father had died while shaving. I had never been told that. I didn't know what he looked like. I didn't know that detail at all. And now, as I've gotten older, I feel like I might have inherited a little of what both my grandmother and my dad have. A few years ago, my dad and I were driving to football training. We were coming up to a roundabout, sitting in the left lane to go straight ahead. A large black Mercedes pulled up beside us in the right lane. And suddenly, I just knew. I had this sharp, clear thought that the driver was going to cut across us and try to take the third exit from the wrong lane. Before I could even stop myself, I blurted out, "He's going to take the third exit. He's going to hit us." My dad looked at me like I'd said something completely absurd. I was 16. I didn't drive, and I had no real reason to think that. But I just said, "I know." And then it happened. When we moved forward to take our exit, the other driver swerved exactly the way I'd seen it in my mind. We later found out he was drunk. If my dad hadn't already been ready because of what I said, that car would have slammed straight into my door. Instead, my dad braked and steered just enough that the impact hit the front side of the car instead of me. I think about that a lot. Little things still happen too. I'll get these very specific thoughts that feel almost random, and then seconds later they come true. Once, I was walking my dog and had this sudden thought. What if there's a dog around this corner and it attacks? I pulled my dog's leash closer without really knowing why, and as soon as we turned the corner, another dog charged straight at us, dragging its owner behind it. The only reason my dog didn't get hurt was because I had already pulled her close enough to scoop her up. So I don't really know what to call it. Maybe it's instinct. Maybe it's something spiritual. Maybe it's my family, somehow, passing down a kind of awareness I don't fully understand. But I do know this. I've always felt watched over. Not in a frightening way, in a protected way. I live in one of those small apartment buildings where life just sort of repeats itself. Same neighbors passing each other in the hallway, same footsteps overhead, same elevator that groans like it's tired of everyone's problems. Nothing ever really changes there, so when the couple in the apartment next to mine suddenly disappeared, I noticed right away. They didn't say goodbye to anyone. One day, they were there, yelling through the walls, slamming cabinets, throwing out words sharp enough to cut through plaster. And then the next day, their apartment was just empty. No moving van outside, no cardboard boxes stacked by the stairs, no awkward little farewell in the lobby. Just gone. At first, I told myself they must have left in a rush. People do that, right? Relationships fall apart, rent gets missed, someone makes a decision at midnight, and by morning, there's nothing left but nail holes and dust. And honestly, part of me was relieved. I know that sounds cold, but their arguments used to keep me awake. Almost every night, I'd lie there staring at the ceiling while Marcus and Elena went at each other through the wall. So when they left, I thought maybe I'd finally get some sleep. But the silence after they were gone didn't feel peaceful. It felt wrong. The first night, I woke up a little after 2 in the morning. At first, I didn't know what had pulled me out of sleep. I just sat there in the dark, heart beating too fast, listening. Then it happened again. A heavy thud against the wall. Not a tap, not a knock. Something solid, something big, like a chair being shoved over, or a body hitting plaster. I stared at the wall between my apartment and theirs. Then I heard voices. Muffled at first, but angry. A man and a woman. And the strange thing is, I knew those voices. I knew the rhythm of them. The way his voice would rise first, low and hard, and then hers would cut in, trembling but furious. It was them. It was Marcus and Elena. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand. 2:14 a.m. I got out of bed and pressed my ear to the wall like an idiot in a horror movie, but I couldn't help myself. The voices got clearer, though not clear enough to make out the words. Still, there was no mistake. They were arguing. Again. Except they couldn't have been, because they had moved out. The next morning, I found the building manager in the lobby and asked him about it. I tried to sound casual, but I'm pretty sure my face betrayed me. He frowned and said, "They moved out 3 days ago. Locks were changed yesterday." I asked him if maybe someone else had gotten inside. He looked almost offended. "No one has the keys," he said. "That apartment is empty." I let it go, but something about the way he said that word stayed with me. Empty. Like he was trying to convince both of us. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat upright in bed with my phone in my hand, staring at the time as if I could scare the minutes into behaving. And at exactly 2:14 a.m., it started again. The voices, the anger, the same argument spilling through the wall like it had been waiting all day to begin. This time, I recorded it. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. It was louder than before, more violent. I heard something smash, glass maybe, and then Elena screamed. Not shouted, screamed. Then, all at once, everything stopped. No fading out, no door slam, no footsteps, just silence. Like the whole room next door had been swallowed. I played the recording back immediately. There was nothing on it. No voices, no crash, no scream. Just a flat hiss of static. The timestamp was right there on the screen. It had recorded at the exact moment I heard everything, but the audio was empty. That was when the fear really settled in. Not the sudden kind, the slow kind. The kind that pulls up a chair and makes itself comfortable. On the third night, I made a choice that I still wish I could take back. I went into the hallway. The building was dead quiet at that hour. Even the pipes seemed to be holding their breath. The ceiling lights flickered once, then steadied, leaving long shadows stretched across the carpet. I walked toward their door, apartment 302. And as I got closer, I heard the argument again. Not muffled anymore. Clear. Loud. Coming from inside. I want to tell you about one of the strangest and most unforgettable nights I've ever had. There's a little bit of backstory, so I'll keep it simple. When I was growing up, my family was very close with the people who lived next door. We did everything together. Vacations, birthdays, sleepovers, cookouts, all of it. Their house felt almost like an extension of ours. But over time, the parents went through a really painful rough patch in their marriage. Eventually, the mom decided she wanted a divorce, and soon after that, she took the kids on a summer trip to Washington to visit relatives. While they were gone, the dad took his own life in the house. It was devastating, not just for his family, but for us too, because we had known him for years. After that, the family moved away, and the house sat quiet for a while. About 8 months later, a new family moved in. They had 3 young kids, and since I was babysitting for extra money at the time, they asked me one evening if I could watch the children while they went out for a late movie. When I got there, the baby was already asleep. I only needed to put the toddler to bed and then let the oldest, a little girl named Lily, stay up until around 9. Everything was normal at first. I got the toddler tucked in, and when 9 o'clock came around, I took Lily upstairs. She asked if I could read her a story, and of course I said yes. But while I was reading, she kept looking past me. Not just glancing. She was staring over my shoulder, making these nervous little faces, like she was trying not to react to something. So I finally stopped and asked, "Sweetheart, what's wrong?" And she said, very quietly, "The sad man is back." I remember feeling this chill move through me. I said, "The sad man?" She nodded and pointed behind me. "He's right there. He keeps making my baby upset." She had this little baby doll tucked beside her, and she kept insisting that the sad man was bothering it and making it cry. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to scare her, so I just asked if she wanted me to close the bedroom door. She said yes. So I closed it, finished the story, and sat with her until she finally fell asleep. After that, I went to check on the actual baby. And the baby's room was the same room where our old neighbor had died. The second I opened the door, the air felt freezing. Not just a little cool, but icy in a way that didn't make sense. There was a small nightlight glowing near the crib, barely enough to see by. I leaned over to check on the baby, and while I was standing there, I felt what seemed like fingers press onto my shoulder. I turned around immediately. No one was there. The baby was still asleep. The room was silent. I left and went downstairs as calmly as I could, though inside I felt like my nerves had turned into glass. I sat on the couch and turned on the TV, trying to convince myself I was just creeped out because I knew what had happened in that house. But from where I was sitting, I could see the staircase. And I kept seeing something at the top of it. It looked like a head peeking around the corner. At first, I thought it had to be one of the kids, so I got up, went upstairs, turned on the light, and checked everything. All the bedroom doors were still closed. The bathroom was empty. Nobody was out of bed. So I went back downstairs and told myself I was imagining things. Maybe 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps above me. Slow, steady pacing. Back and forth. Then the footsteps came toward the stairs and stopped right at the top. I stared up there, waiting. Nothing moved. The kids' doors were still closed, so I knew it wasn't them. Then, a few minutes later, Lily came running out of her room, crying. She came straight to me, shaking and upset, and I tried to calm her down enough to tell me what had happened. She said, "The sad man came into my room. I told him he wasn't allowed, but he came in anyway. He was standing at the end of my bed." That was enough for me. I took her upstairs only long enough to grab her pillow and blanket, and then I brought her back down to the couch. I wasn't going to make that child sleep in that room again. While she was lying there trying to fall asleep, her bedroom door, which we had left open upstairs, slowly moved. It looked exactly like someone had just walked out. About half an hour later, her parents came home. Her dad saw her sleeping on the couch and asked what happened. I was going to say she'd had a nightmare because I didn't know how to explain any of it. But Lily woke up and immediately started telling him about the sad man. Her dad just rolled his eyes. He told her there was no such thing and that she needed to stop making things up. He brought her back upstairs, and I could hear them arguing a little as he kept telling her she was going back to bed. I felt awful for her. The mom paid me and thanked me, and I wanted so badly to say something. I wanted to tell her what had happened in that house before they moved in. But I didn't know if it was my place, and I didn't want to sound like I was trying to frighten her. So I went home. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. A few days later, I told another neighbor what had happened. He decided to go over and speak with the mom himself. He told her about the man who had lived there before and what had happened just months before they moved in. And strangely enough, she wasn't surprised. She told him that she and the kids had already experienced things in the house. Her husband, though, never had. So every time the children talked about the sad man, he thought they were just making excuses not to go to bed. My family moved away about 6 months after that, but I kept in touch with a few people from the neighborhood. From what I heard, that family only stayed in the house for about a year. After they left, it sat empty for a few months before it was finally sold. That's the last I ever heard about it. I want to tell you about the house I grew up in, because I don't think you can really understand what happened there unless you know what that place was before it ever belonged to us. The land used to hold a little one-room schoolhouse, built sometime around the late 1800s. By the 1950s, the school had closed, and a couple bought the property. They moved the old schoolhouse to the back corner of the lot and built a modest ranch-style home where the main house stood. Years later, in the 1980s, my father bought it from them. He was already living there when he met my mother. She moved in after they married in 1992, and I was born a couple of years later. When my younger brother was on the way, my father had an addition built onto the house. That house sat right where two rural roads met, on a corner that always felt unsafe. Cars went off the road more than once and ended up in our yard. I know at least 2 of those accidents were fatal. There were other bad things too. Once, during repairs after a roof job went wrong and heavy rains flooded the house, a worker lost part of his finger in the old bathroom. And I need to say this plainly. My father was not a kind man. He hurt my mother, my brother, and me. I won't go into the details here because that isn't really what this story is about. But the feeling of him, the way he spoke, the coldness in his eyes, still visits me in nightmares. I stopped speaking to him years ago, and as far as I know, he still lives in that house alone. The first strange thing I know about happened before I was born, when my mother was pregnant with me. My father worked evenings, so she would go to bed before he came home. Almost every night, after she was already in bed but before he returned, the phone would ring. When she answered, there was nothing but static. No voice, no breathing, just that harsh, empty hiss. It never happened when my father was home, only when she was alone. Then, not long before I was born, the calls stopped completely and never happened again. Years later, when my mother was home with us during the day, something odd happened constantly in the kitchen. She would be putting dishes away, and the cabinet door she needed would open by itself. Then, after she was done, it would close again. Not all the cabinets, just the right one. The strange part was that the cabinets had magnetic latches. They weren't loose, and they weren't uneven. My mother checked. Nothing was wrong with them. And they never opened for my father or anyone else. After my brother was born, I moved into what had once been my father's office. That was when I started hearing footsteps at night. I would wake up and hear someone pacing in the hallway outside my bedroom door. Back and forth, back and forth. The steps were too heavy to be my mother's, and I could hear my father snoring through the wall between my room and theirs. So whoever, or whatever, was walking outside my door was not either of them. I remember lying there, frozen under the blankets, staring at the doorknob. I was sure it was going to turn. It never did. But that didn't make it feel safer. At some point, I became aware of something else in that room. This was different from the footsteps. This felt like a presence in the corner near the window. It felt dark there, even in a room that should have had light. And whatever was in that corner felt like it wanted to hurt me. I kept a nightlight in that room long after I stopped needing one anywhere else. I believed, with my whole little heart, that if the room ever became completely dark, something terrible would happen. The whole house had a heavy feeling to it. Oppressive is the best word I can use. But the addition felt different. In there, I could breathe easier. It felt lighter. I remember standing in the addition after dark, looking toward the older part of the house, and feeling absolute terror at the thought of walking back into it. There was no clear reason for it. No sound, no shadow, nothing I could point to. Just fear, sudden and huge. The basement was worse. It was only partly finished, always damp, and at one point they found black mold down there. I hated going into it. The farther I went down the stairs, the harder it was to breathe. One time I saw glowing eyes on the landing where the stairs turned. I thought it was my father's cat watching me from the dark. Later, I found out the cat had been put down the week before. Then there was the old schoolhouse. My father was a photographer, and he converted it into a studio. I spent a lot of time there as a child, but I never felt alone in that building. Not once. It always felt like something was watching me. And somehow, I felt like it was above me, on the ceiling. One day, my brother and I were playing in the studio when something happened that I still don't know how to explain. Suddenly, I wasn't looking out through my own eyes anymore. I was above us. I could see my brother and myself playing down below, as though I were the thing on the ceiling, watching us. It lasted for a few minutes. Then, just like that, I was back in my body, standing on the floor as if nothing had happened. Those are the things I remember most clearly from that house. There may have been more, especially things that happened to my mother, but if there were, she never told me. My brother later said he felt something watching us from the ceiling in the studio too. He also said things happened in his room, though I don't know the details. As for my father, I never heard him say he experienced anything. But honestly, even if he did, I don't think he would have told anyone. I was 9 years old when my father died by suicide in our family home. For years before that, life had already been heavy. My dad's drinking had taken over so much of our world, and everyone in the house had been carrying more than any of us knew how to carry. The first night after he was gone, the rest of us slept together in one large bed. It was my mom, my older brother, my sister, and me. I think none of us wanted to be alone. The house felt too quiet and too full at the same time. I barely slept that night. I kept drifting off, waking up, then drifting off again. At one point, I remember lying there awake, staring out the window beside the bed, when I heard something I had never heard before. And I need to explain this clearly because I had lived in that house my entire life. I knew the sounds it made. I knew the creaks, the wind, the animals, the pipes, the old farmhouse noises. But this was different. It sounded like drumming. Not a drum exactly, but a rhythm being tapped against something metallic, maybe sheet metal. There were no voices, no footsteps with it, just this pattern on metal. It went something like dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum, da-da-dum. The heavier beats were sharper, almost intentional. It had this strange, old, ritual kind of feeling to it. I do not really know how else to describe it. Something about it felt almost like shamanic music, though I know that sounds odd. This happened in Finland, out in the countryside, and the sound continued for a few minutes. Then it stopped. I heard it again a little over a year later. By then, we had moved to the other side of the country, but we still owned the farm where I had grown up. My brother and I stayed there for 2 nights before the place was sold. That second night, the sound woke me up. The same rhythm, the same metal-like drumming, the same feeling. I knew immediately it was the sound from that first night after my father died. I did not have to think about it. My whole body recognized it before my mind did. This time, I was terrified. I got out of bed and went into the room where my brother was sleeping because I could not stay alone with that sound. To this day, I still do not know what it was. I know Finnish farmhouses. I know the wilderness. I know what animals sound like, what weather sounds like, what old buildings do at night. This was not any of that. And after those 2 nights, I never heard it again. I have always felt it was connected to my father somehow. After he died, there were other things too. Footsteps when no one was there. Sudden temperature changes that did not feel natural. Objects falling for no clear reason. Small things that made it feel like something or someone was still present. My mother even said she saw him a couple of times. I am older now, 27, and some questions have only grown louder with time. This is one of them. I feel like that rhythm meant something. I do not know what, and maybe I never will, but it has stayed with me all these years. So if anyone has ever heard of something like this, or has any knowledge, experience, or even a theory, I would be grateful to hear it. Back in the early 2000s, my friends and I went through this short phase where we were really into ghost hunting. For a few months, that was our thing. We'd look up the creepiest places near us, wait until late at night, and then go see what we could find. Most of the places were scary in that normal, abandoned building kind of way. Broken windows, old furniture, weird noises, stuff like that. But there was one house that was different. That one still bothers me when I think about it. The house was in Chino, California. It's gone now, but at the time it was still standing. People around there called it the Copeland House. The story we heard was that sometime in the 80s, a man escaped from the nearby prison and broke into this house to hide. Back then, that area was a lot more rural. Mostly farmland, cows, open space, and houses spread far apart. A family lived in that house. A mother, a father, and 2 children. A boy and a girl. From what we were told, the escaped prisoner attacked the family and killed them in a terrible way. The boy was badly hurt, but somehow managed to crawl into a hallway closet and survive. The rest of the family didn't. I don't know how much of every detail was true, but that was the story we had heard before going there. So one night, of course, we decided to go. There were 5 of us. We pulled up in the middle of the night, and the place looked exactly like the kind of house you'd regret entering. It was fenced off, the windows were boarded up, there were old warning signs, and graffiti covered the outside. The whole place had this heavy feeling before we even stepped inside. We found a way through the fence and got around to the back. One of the windows already had the boards ripped off, and the glass was broken, so we climbed in one at a time. A couple of us had brought things for protection, just in case there were people inside. One friend had a camera and kept taking pictures as we moved through the house. Inside, the house was empty, but not in a clean way. It felt abandoned in the worst possible sense. There were broken picture frames still hanging on the walls, graffiti everywhere, and awful messages written across the rooms. Things like, "Don't go in," "Death is here," and other stuff that felt less like teenage vandalism and more like warnings. We moved through the living room first, then toward the kitchen. All the cabinet doors were hanging open. We had only one flashlight, so everyone stayed close together in a line. I was at the back. Eventually, we reached the hallway closet. According to the story, that was where the little boy had crawled after he was attacked. Someone opened the closet door, and I remember looking down at the carpet. A huge part of it was stained dark. Old, dried blood, or at least that's what it looked like. That was the first moment where the whole thing stopped feeling like a scary adventure. We kept going down the hall and checked the rooms. Every room had something written on the walls or ceiling. Some of it was just crude graffiti, but some messages felt personal, almost desperate. Then we got to the master bedroom. That room felt colder than the rest of the house. I know that sounds dramatic, but I really don't know how else to describe it. It felt like pressure, like the air in there was heavier. There were dark stains on the carpet, and right near the light switch, someone had written a message that made my skin crawl. I don't remember the exact words, but it was something close to, "Do not lock anyone in this room alone. Please don't. This is not a joke." None of us laughed at that. The house wasn't big, so it didn't take long to see most of it. After a while, we started heading back out. I was still at the end of the line, and my friend with the camera was still taking random pictures. That's when I heard it. It was a little girl's moan. Clear as day. Not a scream, not a whisper, just this sad, aching sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside the house. The hair on the back of my neck stood up immediately. I was about to ask the person in front of me, "Did you hear that little girl?" But I stopped myself because I didn't want to put the idea in their head. So instead, I just asked, "Did you hear something?" They turned around slowly, eyes wide, and said, "I just heard a little girl moan." That was it. We were done. We ran for the window so fast that one of my friends cut himself climbing out. One of the biggest guys in our group completely froze once we got outside. He was a tall, strong guy, the kind of person you'd expect to be calm in a situation like that. But he just dropped down and started crying. He kept saying, "Something evil is in that house." One of the girls with us had to sit with him, hold his hand, and talk him through it before he could stand up and get back to the car. That was our last ghost hunting trip. None of us wanted to do it anymore after that. A few days later, my friend uploaded the photos from his camera. The pictures from before and after that house were normal, clear, ordinary pictures. But the photos from inside the Copeland house were filled with orbs. Dozens of them, floating in the rooms, in the hallway, all over. I know people explain those away as dust or camera glare, and maybe that's true. But after what we heard in that house, those pictures felt different. I wish I still had them, but it wasn't my camera, and this was before smartphones were everywhere. Years later, maybe around 2020, I was at my mom's house and saw a newspaper sitting on her dinner table. I remember thinking that was strange, because hardly anyone I knew still got newspapers. Then I noticed a small story on the front page about the escaped convict from that old case finally being put to death. It felt like the whole thing had come back around after all those years. I still think about that house sometimes. I think about that sound in the hallway. I think about how both of us heard the same thing at the same time. And even now, it still gives me chills. So this all started a little over a month ago. There wasn't some dramatic moment that kicked it off. Nothing fell off a shelf, no shadow crossed my room, no whisper in my ear. It was quieter than that. I just started getting this strange feeling whenever I tried to go to sleep. And it wasn't exactly fear. It wasn't that classic feeling of someone's watching me or something terrible is about to happen. It was more like my body knew something was wrong before my mind did. Just this heavy little warning sitting in my chest telling me something is off. For a while, the only way I could sleep was with the TV on. If I turned it off, I'd either lie awake for hours, completely exhausted but unable to drift off, or I'd sleep horribly. I'd have nightmares, wake up soaked in sweat, sometimes more than once in the same night. I mean completely drenched, like I'd stepped out of a shower. After a couple of weeks of that, I started realizing the TV wasn't helping as much as I wanted it to. The light was too bright. The noise was too much. I used to sleep best in total darkness, so eventually I told myself I was being ridiculous and decided to go back to sleeping the way I normally did. For the first few nights, nothing happened. Then the sound started. Every night, right when I was close to falling asleep, I'd hear something outside the edge of my hearing. It sounded almost like an animal, but not quite. That's the only way I can explain it. It had the shape of an animal sound, but something about it was wrong. Like something was trying to copy an animal without really understanding how animals sound. At first, I tried to be logical. I'm not someone who jumps straight to ghosts or demons. I don't fully deny that kind of stuff, but I don't exactly go looking for it either. I thought maybe my brain was playing tricks on me because I was tired. But then I realized I could hear it even when I was fully awake. Eyes open, body moving. Not dreaming, not stuck in sleep paralysis. Just lying there in the dark, listening to something that should not have been there. And honestly, for a while I wondered if there was some kind of creature involved. I know that sounds ridiculous. I even thought of those stories about skinwalkers for a second, but I live nowhere near America. I'm in a crowded city, surrounded by buildings and traffic, with the nearest real forest miles and miles away. So that didn't make sense either. Then things got worse. About a week ago, I was lying in bed, half asleep and half awake, when I felt something touch me from behind in a way that was so invasive and wrong that I shot up instantly. My whole body jolted awake. I was shaking, but I tried not to panic. I told myself maybe it was some strange half-dream, some lighter version of sleep paralysis, since I had been right on the edge of sleep. Nothing else happened that night, so I forced myself to let it go. A couple of days later, my girlfriend Mira came over. We were lying in that same bed, and I finally told her everything. I wasn't even sure I should talk about it in the room where it had been happening, but part of me wanted to see if saying it out loud would change anything. She listened quietly. Then she told me I should probably ask a priest to come to the house. I told her I'd think about it. I respect religion, but I've never really been the kind of person who leans on it. Still, the fact that she said it so seriously stayed with me. The next night, nothing happened. But the night after that, it happened again. I was very sleepy, but not asleep. Maybe 75% awake. I knew where I was. I knew what position I was lying in. And just like before, I felt something behind me. The strangest part is that both times it happened, I had been facing the wall, with my back turned toward the room. That detail bothers me more than I want to admit. After that, almost a week passed with nothing. I started thinking maybe it was over. I took a few precautions, changed how I slept, kept lights closer, tried not to face the wall anymore. For a few days, life felt normal again. Then today, it started up again. And this time, I wasn't even home. I was with some friends at another apartment I own. We were just hanging out, talking about random stuff, and eventually the conversation drifted into paranormal stories. So I told them mine. I told them about the sounds, the feeling in my room, the things that had happened at night. About an hour later, we decided to leave and go walk around the city for some air. My apartment is on the 3rd floor. Usually when we leave, my friends wait for me while I lock up. But this time, for some reason, they all rushed ahead and went downstairs without me. The moment they were about 2 floors below, the hallway lights flickered. Not once. Twice. And I just remember thinking, absolutely not. I locked the door as fast as I could and got out of there. Later, we all headed home. I called a ride, got dropped off near my street, and started walking toward my house. Now, my house is strange. It's basically one building split into 2 halves. My side is lived in, but the other half is abandoned. Empty. Dark. The kind of place you try not to look at too long when you pass it at night. Right in front of that abandoned half, under the streetlight, I saw something. It was completely black. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. It was standing partly in the light and partly in the shadows. From the waist up, I couldn't see anything clearly. It was swallowed by darkness. But the lower half was visible enough. It looked like a torso with 3 legs. I know how that sounds. I know it sounds impossible. But I stood there about 5 meters away, staring at it for a few seconds, trying to make my brain correct the image into something normal. It didn't. One of the legs moved. And when it moved, it almost looked like it was splitting or bending in a way that didn't belong to a person or an animal. Usually, when something like this happens, I freeze. My stomach drops, my skin crawls, and I get this wave of sickness through my whole body. But this time, I felt nothing. That might be the scariest part. I just stared at it. Then I unlocked my door, stepped inside, locked it behind me, and went straight to the window to look out. Whatever it was gone. I never really believed in ghosts. I mean, I grew up with the idea of spirits in a church sense, but when it came to haunted houses, shadow figures, cryptids, all of that, my brain always had one foot planted firmly in logic. Still, I was fascinated by it. Completely fascinated. When I was a kid, my cousin lived near a cemetery, and I remember sneaking in there sometimes, half scared and half hoping I'd see something. A ghost, a shape, anything. But nothing ever happened. I live in the Pacific Northwest too, so whenever I'm out in the forest, some tiny part of me is always looking between the trees for Bigfoot, just in case. But again, nothing. So my rational mind kept winning. And yet, there I was, still wearing Mothman shirts, still watching every grainy cryptid video online, still reading about things I didn't fully believe in, but couldn't stop thinking about. Then things started getting strange. I met a woman named Marin during a Dungeons & Dragons campaign. She was a practicing satanic priestess, which sounded so over the top at first that I honestly laughed it off. I remember thinking, sure, you're in league with dark forces, but does my armor class save me from this goblin attack? That was basically my attitude. Then she proved it. Twice. I'm going to keep some of the details vague, partly out of respect, and partly because, even now, she scares me in a way I don't like admitting. There's this feeling I get, even thinking about her, like she'd somehow know. The first time, she told us a man had wronged her by cutting down trees on her property, a place where she practiced. She said very calmly that he would be cut down. About a month later, he was in a terrible accident and lost both legs above the knee. The second time involved a guy I worked with. Nobody could stand him, including her husband, who also worked with me. One day her husband mentioned that Marin had put a curse on him. He said she had taken certain objects, things connected to the situation, and put them in the freezer to cool him off. Over the next few months, that man's entire life fell apart. Not in a minor, bad week kind of way. I mean, everything was uprooted. It was tragic. The kind of thing that forces a person to rebuild from the ground up. You would think I stopped going to their house immediately. I did not. The campaign was really good, and Marin liked me. That probably sounds ridiculous, but it's true. So I kept going for a while. Then one day, I got there before everyone else. We were alone, waiting for the group to show up, and we started talking. The conversation turned to religion, then my childhood faith, then my modern belief that paranormal things were interesting, but probably fictional. She listened quietly. Then she leaned forward and kissed me gently on the forehead. It wasn't romantic at all. It felt almost grandmotherly, like a blessing, or something pretending to be one. She told me it would help me see better. At the time, I didn't know what to do with that, so I just sort of tucked it away in my mind and moved on. Then, not long after, I looked up one day and saw something walking in front of me. A shadow person. Not a blur, not a trick of the eye. A full figure. It looked like a complete void, a person-shaped absence, moving calmly through the room. And somehow, even though it had no face, I felt like it was looking at me. The strangest part was that I didn't feel fear. There was no malice, no threat. It felt almost casual, like it was passing by and saying hello. But my body didn't understand that. My face went cold, and I felt all the blood drain out of me. My rational mind just collapsed in on itself, scrambling for an explanation and finding nothing. After that, as I kept reading and studying more about the paranormal and the occult, I would encounter that presence again. I believe it follows me now. But even with all of that, nothing physical had ever really happened. Not in a way I could point to and say, "There, that happened outside my head." Until tonight. I have this lamp in my home office. It belonged to someone who, as far as I know, may or may not be deceased. I've never been totally sure about the history there. It's one of those old glass banker-style lamps, the kind you might imagine on a detective's desk. Every so often, the glass shade turns by itself. Now, of course, there are normal explanations. Gravity, loose hardware, vibrations from footsteps, the house settling. And I understand all of that. But it has always felt intentional. Tonight I was sitting at my computer, with my back to the lamp, when I heard the shade turn over again. Without even looking, I said what I usually say when it happens. "Hello. Anyone there who wants to talk?" I say it mostly to make myself laugh. It's become a little ritual, a way of pretending I'm braver and less curious than I actually am. But tonight, the lamp turned on. The lamp has a pull chain at the bottom. When you turn it on or off, it makes this loud, ugly little click. You can't miss it. Tonight, there was no click. None. I just saw the light come on. It was smooth, almost like a motion sensor, except this lamp does not work that way. I'm writing this now and I still feel strange, almost outside my own body. After all these years of curiosity, after all the searching and reading and wondering, something finally answered in a way I couldn't explain away. A light came on behind me, and for the first time, it really felt like a message. I'm a 36-year-old man living in Northern Europe. I had a pretty ordinary childhood, really. Middle-income family, stable home, nothing dramatic on the surface. I did well in school, though I never felt like I was trying very hard. Answers just seemed to come to me. I didn't know how I knew certain things, but I did. And at the time, I never questioned it much. As an adult, I became a clinical psychologist with a focus on psychiatry and trauma-related disorders. I got married, had children, bought a house. From the outside, my life probably looks very normal. But I've always felt different. Not lonely exactly, because I've always had close friends and people around me. Just different in a way I could never really explain. And I suppose the reason for that becomes clearer when I talk about what happened when I was younger. It still feels strange saying all of this out loud. My experiences started as far back as I can remember. The first things I saw were lights. Orbs, I guess you could call them. Even thinking about it now gives me goosebumps. But back then, at first, it didn't feel frightening. There was one presence in particular that I somehow felt I could communicate with. I remember seeing it in my bedroom, always as a bright little mass of light moving through the air. Sometimes I'd notice it at preschool too, drifting near the corners of the room or hovering just out of reach. I don't know when it changed, but at some point I became afraid. I stopped seeing things, or maybe I stopped allowing myself to see them. At night, once I closed my eyes, I didn't dare open them again. I often had the feeling that something was watching me. I hated being alone. I hated the silence of my room after everyone else had gone to sleep. When I was around 11, I developed a severe headache that lasted nearly a year. I missed a lot of school. Doctors ran tests, tried different treatments, but nothing helped, and no explanation ever came. Painkillers barely touched it. Honestly, I don't remember much from that period. I remember my parents being scared. I remember the house feeling heavy. And I remember waking up one morning to find a note beside my bed, written in English, in handwriting that looked like mine, though I had no memory of writing it. Eventually, when my parents were nearly out of options, they contacted an older woman named Elna. She was known quietly in our area as someone who worked with things people didn't really talk about, spiritual things, energy, whatever name you want to give it. She came to the house once, just once, and after that, the pain was gone. For a while after that, things became very strange again. People mostly noticed the cats. Cats would follow me around constantly, even ones I didn't know. It was bizarre, honestly, but also kind of funny. I'd walk somewhere and there would be this little parade of cats trailing behind me like I owed them rent. Then I started feeling something in my hands whenever someone nearby was in pain. A sort of pressure or warmth or buzzing under the skin. I told my mother about it. She was open-minded, much more than the rest of our family. One day, when she had a migraine, I put my hands on her head, and the migraine disappeared. She never had another attack after that. Afterward, I did the same thing for a few relatives. I don't know what to call it. Healing sounds too big, too dramatic, but that's what it seemed like. And it was strange because my family wasn't religious. We weren't spiritual people. We didn't have language for any of it. Things just happened, and then everyone quietly tried to return to normal. A few years later, though, the experiences changed again. I began seeing darker things, violent things, brutal images I didn't want in my mind. I started feeling awful, like something had opened too wide and I couldn't close it. At some point, I made a decision. I was still young, but I remember it clearly. I decided I was going to shut it all down, lock it away, refuse to look. And in a way, it worked. I don't see things anymore, not directly, but I still feel them sometimes. Now, working in psychiatry, I've met certain patients who describe experiences that sound painfully familiar. They talk about lights, orbs, but more often they talk about shadows, figures watching them, and the details are what unsettle me. The same details again and again. A tall shape, a hat, something standing in the corner, something waiting. These patients are treated as mentally ill, and maybe that's the correct framework. I know the diagnostic language. I know the clinical explanations. I use them every day. But there is still a part of me that wonders, because some of them don't sound like the others. Some of them describe things with a clarity that feels different. And when they speak, I recognize what they're talking about. Not intellectually, not professionally. Somewhere deeper than that. I know those shadows. I know those lights. And I know that whatever they are describing is the same thing I once saw, and the same thing I still sometimes feel near me. I just don't look anymore. Hi everyone. I want to tell you about something that happened to me when I was a teenager. I'm 23 now, but back then I was still living with my parents in the house I'd grown up in. We moved there when I was about 7. It wasn't some creepy old place with a strange history, and honestly, nothing unusual had ever happened there before. No footsteps, no shadows, no weird feelings. Just a normal family home. This happened on a Wednesday afternoon. In my country, we didn't have classes on Wednesdays, so I was home by myself. We had an alarm system with a few different settings. You could leave it off completely, turn on the full alarm, or set it to partial mode. Partial mode meant the outside doors, the garage, and my dad's study were protected, but you could still walk around inside the house. Whenever I was alone, I always used the partial alarm. That day, I did exactly that. I was in my bedroom watching a movie when I heard the electric garage door open. A few seconds later, I heard the door from the garage into the study open too. That room was right across from my bedroom, so the sounds were very clear. I immediately thought, okay, Dad's home. I didn't pause the movie or get up. I just waited for him to call out or come say hello, like he usually did. But 10 minutes went by. No hello, no footsteps, nothing. That felt strange, so I got up and checked the house. I looked around, called out, but nobody answered. The study door was closed, just like it should have been with the alarm active. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. My dad usually came home around that time, so maybe my brain had just filled in the blanks. I went back to my room, sat down, and tried to keep watching the movie. A little while later, I decided to go to the bathroom. The bathroom was right next to my bedroom, between my room and the study. I had just reached for the door handle when I heard the coats moving. We had coats hanging on the door between the study and the garage, and I knew that sound perfectly. It was the exact sound they made when someone opened or closed that door and brushed against them. I froze. I mean, completely froze. Those coats shouldn't have been moving. Nobody was supposed to be in that room. The study door was closed, and the motion detector in there was supposed to trigger the alarm if anyone walked around. I stood there for several seconds, trying to explain it away. Maybe a draft? Maybe something settling? Then I heard another sound. The office chair dragged across the floor. Not a vague noise, not a random creak. It was that sharp, familiar scrape of the chair being pushed back. The same sound I had heard hundreds of times when my dad moved it out of the way. That was it for me. My whole body went cold, and I ran out of the house. I called my dad while I was outside and told him I thought someone was inside and that he needed to be careful when he came home. I had dance class shortly after, so I went there still shaking and trying not to think about it. That night, when I came home, I asked my dad if he had found anyone in the house. He said no, nobody was there. The alarm had never gone off. Nothing looked disturbed. My parents didn't really take it seriously. They listened, but I could tell they thought I had just scared myself. But I know what I heard. To this day, I don't really know what happened. Maybe someone was inside somehow, but then why didn't the alarm go off? Maybe it was something paranormal, but then how did it make such physical sounds, like the coats moving and the chair scraping? Sometimes I wonder if it was some kind of replay, like an echo of a normal routine. Garage door opening, study door opening, coats shifting, chair moving. All the little sounds my dad would make when he came home. Whatever it was, nothing like that ever happened again before I moved out. But after that day, being home alone never felt the same. I've always been skeptical about the paranormal. Not dismissive exactly, just skeptical. I've always found it interesting though. I used to watch those strange videos online and try to figure out the trick behind them. The shadow, the edit, the sound, whatever could explain it. But about 9 years ago, things started happening in my own home that I couldn't explain away so easily. At the time, I was 37, and I had 3 kids. My husband and I, he's my ex now, had moved into this little ground floor apartment. I loved it at first. It felt cozy, simple, the kind of place where I thought we could settle for a while. Then, my middle child, my son Elias, started sleepwalking. At first, I didn't panic. His cousin had done the same thing when he was little, so I told myself it was probably just one of those childhood things. Nothing strange, nothing dramatic. But then, when Elias was about 3, he started asking me, "Who's that man?" And I said, "What man?" He looked at me so calmly and said, "The one with the hat." I thought maybe he meant someone from outside. There was a playground right beside our building, so I asked, "Did you see him at the playground?" And he said, "No, at night, in our home." That made me pause, but I still tried to stay reasonable. I figured maybe he'd had a vivid dream and was too young to separate it from real life. So I asked him what the man looked like, thinking I could gently talk him through it. Elias said, "He's tall, he has pale eyes, and he comes after you leave at night." That was the first moment I felt something cold move through me. I knew I probably shouldn't ask the next question, but I did anyway. I said, "What does he do?" And my son said, "He's mad at you. He looks mad, and he stands there watching us." I tried to explain that it was just a dream. I really did. I told him dreams can feel real, especially when you wake up scared. But he kept insisting it wasn't a dream. He said he couldn't fall asleep until the man went away. A few weeks later, Elias started screaming in his sleep. Not crying, not fussing. Screaming. Full terror, like something horrible was happening to him. One night it got so bad that I brought him into our room to sleep beside us. I was already shaken and wide awake, just lying there, listening to him breathe. Then, I heard it. Heavy footsteps in the hallway. Not creaks, not the building settling. Boots. Slow, heavy boots moving through the corridor outside our bedroom. I woke my husband and told him someone was in the apartment. I was completely sure of it. He got up and checked everything. Every room, every corner, the front door, the windows. There was nothing. Nobody was there. For weeks afterward, I tried to find a normal explanation for those sounds. Pipes, neighbors, old flooring, anything. But I know what I heard, and I know I was awake. I wasn't half dreaming. I was too worried about my son to sleep properly at all. And that was when it really began. I was around 8 years old, maybe in 2nd or 3rd grade, when my family moved to this small town in Kentucky, right along the Ohio River. It was one of those places where everything felt old. The streets, the trees, the houses, even the air felt like it had been holding its breath for 100 years. The house we moved into looked ordinary enough from the outside. Nothing dramatic, nothing that screamed run. It had a few charming little details, like this old hand-cranked doorbell by the front door, the kind you had to twist instead of push. But inside my sister and I's bedroom, there was something strange. A trap door. It was built right into the floor, and unless you knew it was there, you would never notice it. That door led down into the cellar, and that cellar was not like any basement I had ever seen. The walls were made of old stone, rough and cold, all mortared together. The floor was coated in this fine black dust. My dad said it was probably coal dust from when people stored coal down there a long time ago. But the walls were what stayed with me. There were thick, rusted chains hanging from them, heavy cuffs too, spaced out every few feet. And there were these big metal rings anchored into the stone, with huge iron balls attached at the ends. They looked awful. Not decorative, not random. Later, we were told the cellar had once been used to hold people who had escaped slavery. After that, the whole house felt different. At first, it was little things. We would come home and the shower would be running, or the kitchen faucet would be on full blast. There were 4 of us kids, so of course we got blamed for it. Then the lights started flickering. Not just a soft flicker either. I mean violent, flashing, almost like a strobe light. My dad kept saying it had to be bad wiring because the house was old, but nobody ever found a real electrical problem. Then we would come home from school and find our toys dumped all over the floor, coloring books ripped apart, crayons snapped in half. And again, we got punished for it. Then one night, while we were sitting at dinner, we all heard this old-fashioned bell ringing through the house. It echoed from room to room. And yes, it was coming from that hand-cranked doorbell. The strange part was, that bell had been painted over so many times that it couldn't be turned. My dad had tried before. He used pliers, screwdrivers, everything. That thing would not move. But now it was ringing. After that, it got worse. Almost every night, right around 3 in the morning, the doorbell would start ringing. Back then, we didn't have cameras everywhere like people do now, so my dad actually stayed up outside, trying to catch whoever was doing it. He never saw anyone. Not once. Then we started hearing the chains. The bell would ring, and then from beneath our bedroom floor, we would hear those chains slamming against the cellar walls. Bang, drag, bang. It was the kind of sound that made your whole body go cold before your brain even understood why. We were so scared that we begged our dad to push a dresser over the trap door, just so nothing could come up through it. Eventually, all 4 of us kids started sleeping together in one full-size waterbed because nobody wanted to be alone. Things kept happening. Stuff vanished. Lights went wild. Faucets turned on. The refrigerator door would be left wide open. And my parents started changing too. They became angrier, harsher. They kept accusing us kids of causing everything, even when we swore we hadn't touched a thing. Then one morning, everything broke loose. My older sister, Marla, used to get up early to do her hair. This was the 80s, so hair was a serious project. Curl it, tease it, spray it until it could survive a windstorm. Half a can of Aquanet was basically the entrance fee. That morning, she switched on the lamp. The bulb exploded. It woke all of us up instantly. Then the waterbed started moving. Not a little ripple. It was shaking and rolling so hard we could barely get off it. At the same time, the chains in the cellar started slamming against the stone walls. Loud, violent, metal-on-rock crashes. Then we heard heavy thumps on the wooden cellar stairs, like something was coming up. The trapdoor shook so hard that the dresser we had pushed over it toppled across the floor. All 4 of us were screaming. My mom came running down the hall, but just as she reached our room, the bedroom door slammed shut in her face. She couldn't get in. We couldn't get out. Then everything in the room seemed to go crazy. Toys started moving. Papers whipped around in the air. Books flew off shelves and slammed into the walls. My brother's remote control car started tearing across the floor by itself. And I remember seeing my light bright move. It didn't just slide. It skittered across the floor like some little plastic animal. That image has never left me. I covered my ears, squeezed my eyes shut, and screamed for my mom. The noise was everywhere. The chains, the banging, the toys, all of us crying. And then, just like that, it stopped. The room went still. The bedroom door flew open. We left immediately. No packing, no discussion. We were still in our pajamas. I never stepped foot in that house again. And to this day, I cannot look at a light bright without feeling like something cold is crawling up my back. My mom and I have always had a real interest in the paranormal. Not in a silly way either. It's something we've been drawn to for years. Before my son was born, we used to go on paranormal investigations together with people who actually knew what they were doing. We'd visit old buildings, listen for strange sounds, watch for things we couldn't explain. And when we weren't doing that, we were usually at home watching paranormal shows. Reenactments, documentaries, investigations, all of it. So this one night, we were sitting together on the sofa like we often did, watching a show called Haunted Stays. It was one of those programs where they tell a story, and then paranormal experts weigh in afterward. During one part of the episode, one of the experts said something about why people should never mess around with Ouija boards, demons, or anything that might invite something in. I turned to my mom and said, "I wouldn't ever mess with that sort of thing. Would you?" She looked at me and, in that joking way she has, said, "Yeah, I probably would." Now, I knew she was joking. I really did. But something about it made me uneasy straight away. I told her, "Don't joke like that. Seriously, you don't know what might take it as an invitation." We had never had anything happen in that house before. No footsteps, no voices, no strange shadows. Nothing. There was no reason for me to think our home was haunted. But I still felt like it was better not to say things like that out loud. Then I started telling her how some people believe spirits or entities can use electricity to make themselves known. My mom just shook her head and said she didn't believe that was possible. I told her again, "Just don't say things like that. Please." And then, not even a minute later, something happened. We were still sitting there watching the television when the top of my left arm suddenly started to burn. It wasn't an ordinary sting. It wasn't like a bug bite or a little scratch. It was this sharp, hot, burning feeling that came out of nowhere. I remember knowing instantly that it wasn't normal. I looked at my mom and said, "My arm is burning. I think something scratched me." I pulled up the sleeve of my shirt, and right there on my skin, a red mark was starting to appear. We both watched it darken in front of us. And it wasn't just a line. It was shaped like a big letter Z. My mom and I froze. I don't think I've ever seen her look that frightened. I know I was terrified because I started shaking. My boyfriend Caleb was in another room at the time, so I got up and went straight to him. I showed him my arm, and he just stared at it. He was completely shocked, too. None of us could explain it. But once the fear hit me, something else came with it. Anger. I was angry that something had come into our home. I was angry that something had hurt me. And I was especially angry because I wasn't even the one who had made the joke. So I stood there and spoke out loud to whatever might have been with us. I said, "You are not welcome here. You have no right to touch me or hurt me. You need to leave this house now." My mom apologized too. She said she was sorry for what she had said, that she had only been joking. After that, we turned the television off. The whole room felt different, like the air had gone too still. Since that night, nothing unseen has ever hurt me again. I've never had another mark appear on my body like that. But I still think about it, because it was honestly one of the most frightening things I've ever experienced. I don't know what came into our home that night. I don't know if it was already there, if it was passing through, or if it somehow took her words as a challenge. And I don't know whether it listened when I told it to leave. What I do know is this. There was no way I scratched myself. My hands were down at my sides while I was watching television. Nobody was sitting close enough to touch me. And the arm that got scratched was against the side of the sofa, right by the wall. So I still wonder about that Z. What did it mean? Why that shape? And why me?